In a sleepy mountain town, chaos erupts at a remote gas station when a gang of bikers encounters a lone Viking reenactor named Bjorn. What begins as a misunderstanding spirals into a clash of cultures, leaving everyone questioning their strength, unity, and beliefs about what truly makes a warrior. The night was still, broken only by the hum of cicadas and the faint rustle of the pines towering over the gas station. It sat on the edge of nowhere, a relic of a simpler time with its flickering neon sign and single-pump service. Inside the small convenience store, a young attendant named Mika absentmindedly flipped through her notebook, bored and eager for her shift to end. The station rarely saw action, with most nights blending into monotony, but tonight felt different, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. The roar of motorcycle engines shattered the silence. A group of 6 bikers clad in leather jackets emblazoned with a skeletal emblem pulled up to the station. They were loud, laughing and shouting as they dismounted, their boots crunching against the gravel. Mika glanced up nervously, her fingers tightening around her pen. Their presence was intimidating, a stark contrast to the stillness of the surrounding forest. As the bikers strutted towards the store, another vehicle pulled into the lot. It was a beat-up pickup truck hauling an open trailer. The sight on the trailer made Mika blink. Perched atop it was a Viking longship, its wooden hull polished and adorned with intricate carvings. The driver stepped out and her eyebrows shot up further. He was tall and broad, with a mane of blonde hair tied back and a thick beard that framed a chiseled face. Dressed in a tunic, leather bracers, and boots that looked like they'd stepped out of a history book, he seemed completely at odds with the modern world around him. Mika watched, transfixed, as he began refueling his truck. The bikers noticed him too. Their laughter turned to murmurs, then outright jeers. "Hey, Thor!" one of them called out. "Comic-Con's that way." The others burst into laughter, their voices echoing across the lot. The Viking, unbothered, continued his task, his calm demeanor only fueling their mockery. He moved with a quiet confidence as though their words were beneath his notice. It was an attitude that both impressed and unsettled Mika, who couldn't tear her eyes away. Another biker, taller and more imposing than the rest, stepped forward. His name was Jace, the leader of the gang, and he had a knack for confrontation. "You deaf, Viking?" he sneered. "We're talking to you." The man straightened, his blue eyes meeting Jace's with an unsettling intensity. "I heard you," he said evenly, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. Jace smirked. "Well, then, what's with the get-up? You some kind of LARPing weirdo?" Mika felt her stomach knot. She'd seen this kind of interaction before. The bikers were looking for a fight, and the Viking seemed like an easy target. But there was something about the way he carried himself, an air of confidence that suggested he wasn't afraid. "I'm Bjorn," he said simply, ignoring the insult, "and I'd prefer to be left in peace." Jace chuckled darkly. "Peace, huh? That's not how things work around here." He gestured to his crew. "What do you say, boys? Think this guy's got what it takes to hang with us?" The gang closed in, forming a semicircle around Bjorn. Mika's pulse quickened. She wanted to intervene, but the fear of drawing their attention kept her rooted in place. Bjorn sighed, setting the fuel nozzle back into the pump. "I don't want trouble," he said, turning to face them fully, "but if you insist, I won't back down." Jace's grin widened. "Big talk, Viking. Let's see if you can back it up." Before anyone could react, one of the bikers lunged at Bjorn. What happened next was a blur. Bjorn sidestepped the attack with surprising agility, his hands moving in a controlled, almost graceful manner. The biker hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. The others hesitated, taken aback by the Viking's unexpected skill. But Jace wasn't about to let it end there. He signaled for the others to attack, and chaos erupted. Bjorn moved like a force of nature, his years of combat training evident in every calculated strike and dodge. He used his surroundings to his advantage, grabbing a metal trash can lid to deflect a chain swung by one of the bikers. The sound of metal clashing against metal echoed through the night. Mika watched in stunned silence, her heart pounding as Bjorn fought off the gang. He was outnumbered, but his sheer determination and skill kept him in the fight. Despite the chaos, there was a strange elegance to his movements, a discipline that contrasted sharply with the biker's brute force. Just when it seemed like Bjorn might gain the upper hand, Jace pulled out a crowbar, swinging it wildly. The Viking blocked the attack with his forearm, gritting his teeth against the pain. He retaliated with a powerful punch that sent Jace staggering back, blood dripping from his nose. The fight came to an abrupt halt as the sound of sirens pierced the air. The bikers froze, exchanging nervous glances before scrambling to their bikes. Jace shot Bjorn a glare, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "This isn't over," he growled before mounting his motorcycle. As the gang roared off into the night, Bjorn stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving. He glanced at Mika, who was still clutching her notebook. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw not just a warrior, but a man burdened by something deeper. His presence lingered in the air like an unanswered question. Without a word, he climbed back into his truck and drove off, leaving the gas station in eerie silence. Mika stood there, the faint smell of gasoline and adrenaline lingering in the air, wondering if she just witnessed the beginning of something much larger. Bjorn adjusted the strap of his satchel as he turned to lock the fuel cap of his truck. The bikers hadn't left. Instead, they were inching closer, their laughter now tinged with menace. The leader, Jace, was twirling a heavy chain in one hand, his smirk a warning of what was about to unfold. Bjorn, unbothered, finished securing his truck and turned to face them. "Thought you could walk away after embarrassing us back there?" Jace snarled, pointing at one of his men, still nursing a bruised shoulder from the earlier encounter. "Nobody makes a fool out of us, Viking." "I told you, I don't want trouble," Bjorn said, his voice steady, though his stance shifted slightly, feet planted, hands loose at his sides. Mika, watching through the glass of the convenience store, saw the subtle transformation. This wasn't just a man in a costume. This was someone who had seen combat before. Jace barked a laugh. "Well, you found it." With a nod to his crew, he set the chaos in motion. The first biker lunged at Bjorn with a crowbar, swinging wide and high. Bjorn stepped into the arc of the swing, catching the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. The crowbar clattered to the ground, and the biker yelped in pain as he crumpled to his knees. Bjorn shoved him aside, already pivoting to face the next attacker. Two came at him this time, one with a knife, the other wielding a chain. The knife slashed through the air, missing Bjorn by inches as he sidestepped with practiced ease. The chain whipped toward him, but Bjorn raised his arm, letting it coil around his bracer. With a powerful yank, he pulled the biker off balance, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. Inside the store, Mika's heart pounded. She knew she should call the police, but her hands were frozen, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The scene outside was surreal, like something out of an old epic tale. Bjorn moved with precision and control, every motion calculated and efficient. The bikers, for all their bluster, were no match for him. Jace watched his men fall one by one, his jaw tightening with fury. "What are you, some kind of wannabe superhero?" he spat, stepping forward. "You think you're better than us?" Bjorn met his gaze evenly. "I think you're wasting your strength on the wrong fight." "Get him!" Jace roared, his face twisted in fury as the remaining three bikers surrounded Bjorn. Mika couldn't take it anymore. She pushed through the door and stepped onto the lot. "Stop it!" she shouted, her voice high and shaking. "Leave him alone!" The bikers barely spared her a glance, but Bjorn's gaze flicked toward her. "Stay back," he warned, his tone firm but not unkind. Her interruption gave one of the bikers an opening. He charged at Bjorn with a baseball bat, swinging for his head. Bjorn ducked low, driving his shoulder into the biker's gut and sending him sprawling. The bat fell from his hands, and Bjorn kicked it away, his movements fluid and unyielding. Another biker took advantage of the distraction, rushing at Bjorn with a yell. This time, Bjorn countered with a swift kick, sending the attacker tumbling into a stack of oil barrels. The clang of metal reverberated through the lot, a sound that seemed to cut through the chaos. Mika hesitated, torn between running for help and staying to ensure Bjorn wasn't overwhelmed. Before she could decide, the sharp wail of sirens filled the air. The bikers froze, their bravado replaced by panic. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. "Cops!" one of them hissed. "We gotta go." Jace cursed under his breath, his glare cutting through the night as he stared down Bjorn. "This isn't over, Viking," he spat before signaling his crew to retreat. The bikers scrambled onto their motorcycles, the roar of their engines echoing as they sped off into the darkness. Bjorn exhaled heavily, his broad chest rising and falling as he surveyed the aftermath. The lot was a mess. Discarded weapons, spilled gasoline, and a scattering of loose gravel marked the battlefield. He turned to Mika, who was still standing near the door, her face pale but resolute. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, concerned. She shook her head, though her hands trembled. "What about you?" "I'm fine," he said, though a faint trickle of blood ran down his forearm where the chain had caught him. "Thank you for trying to help, but it was dangerous. You shouldn't have stepped in." Mika bristled at his calm reprimand. "I couldn't just stand there and watch." Bjorn's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You have courage, but courage without strategy can get you killed." Before she could respond, the sirens grew louder and 2 police cars screeched into the lot. Bjorn's expression hardened. "I need to go." "Wait," Mika started, but he was already moving, climbing into his truck and starting the engine. The trailer rattled as he reversed, pulling away from the station just as the officers stepped out of their cars. "Hey, stop!" one of them shouted, but Bjorn didn't slow down. Within moments, he disappeared into the night, leaving Mika to face the bewildered officers alone. The gas station fell silent once more, the chaos of the fight lingering in the air like the aftermath of a storm. Mika stood there, her notebook clutched to her chest, wondering who Bjorn really was, and what kind of trouble he'd just brought to their quiet town. The cool night air bit at Bjorn's skin as he guided his truck off the main road and into the dense forest. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the faint stinging of the chain wound on his arm, a reminder of the gas station brawl. He glanced at his rearview mirror, scanning for the flashing red and blue lights of law enforcement. For now, the night behind him was dark and empty. His truck rumbled down a narrow dirt path until he reached a secluded clearing. Here, the forest was thick, its trees towering like ancient sentinels. Bjorn parked the truck beside a decaying shed, stepping out into the silence. The sounds of distant crickets and rustling leaves filled the air, grounding him after the chaos. Leaning against the hood of his truck, he unwrapped the strip of fabric he'd tied around his forearm to stem the bleeding. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to sting and remind him of the bikers' unrelenting aggression. He clenched his jaw. Their leader, Jace, wouldn't let this go. Bjorn had seen that look in men before, men consumed by pride and anger. Back at the gas station, Mika stood amid the aftermath. The officers paced the lot, their flashlights scanning over the scattered evidence of the fight: spilled oil, a dented trash can, and faint smears of blood on the gravel. She clenched her notebook tightly as the taller officer questioned her. "So, you're telling us one man took on 6 bikers?" he asked, his tone laden with disbelief. "Yes," Mika replied firmly, though her hands shook. "He didn't start it. They came at him. He just defended himself." "And he left before we got here?" the officer pressed, his skepticism clear. Mika nodded, frustration simmering. "He had to. They were going to kill him." The officers wrote her statement but didn't hide their doubts. As they left, Mika's resolve hardened. She'd told the truth, but it wasn't enough to make them understand the dangers still brewing. As she turned to survey the wreckage, Mika's eyes fell on a small leather-bound notebook lying near the trash can. Curious, she bent to pick it up. Its cover was worn, the corners frayed, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were pages of neat handwriting, filled with symbols, diagrams, and notes in a mix of English and what looked like an ancient language. The illustrations of weapons and runes seemed to pulse with a strange energy. "What is this?" she murmured, running her fingers over the faded ink. It felt important, like a clue to Bjorn's mysterious life. Without hesitation, she slipped it into her bag. At a grimy bar on the outskirts of town, the bikers gathered around a battered table. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and stale beer, the dim light casting long shadows over their angry faces. Jace leaned forward, his bruised nose crinkling as he slammed his fist onto the table. "That Viking wannabe humiliated us," he growled. "Do you think we can let that slide?" One of the younger bikers shifted uneasily. "Jace, he's not normal. Did you see how he fought? It was like he knew every move we were going to make." Jace glared at him, his voice a low snarl. "I don't care what he is. Nobody makes a fool out of us and gets away with it." He leaned in closer, his tone venomous. "We're going to find him, and we're going to make sure he regrets ever crossing us." The gang murmured their agreement, though a few exchanged wary glances. None of them were eager for a rematch, but Jace's word was law. Meanwhile, in the forest, Bjorn settled into the decaying shed he had found. The lantern's soft glow illuminated the cracks in the wooden walls, casting flickering shadows. He unfurled a roll of parchment and began sketching symbols with practiced precision. His breathing slowed as he worked, the familiar patterns calming his restless mind. But even as he focused on the parchment, his thoughts drifted back to the gas station. To the girl who had shouted at the bikers to stop. To the look in Jace's eyes, a look that promised this wasn't over. Bjorn clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. He had left his old life behind for a reason, but it seemed the past was determined to pull him back. Mika, meanwhile, sat in her room, the notebook open on her desk. She pored over the pages, her curiosity growing with each line she read. The runes and sketches told a story she couldn't yet piece together. But one thing was clear. Bjorn was no ordinary man. Who was he? And why had he chosen to live like a modern-day Viking? A particular page caught her eye. An intricate drawing of a shield surrounded by runic inscriptions. Next to it were instructions that seemed almost poetic, describing resilience and honor. Mika couldn't help but wonder if Bjorn lived by these principles, and if so, how they had shaped the man she had seen fight. Hours passed as the notebook consumed her attention. She paused only to sip water or glance at the window, half expecting to hear the rumble of motorcycles returning. But the night remained silent, save for the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. Every now and then, she found her thoughts drifting, imagining Bjorn alone in the forest, preparing for what felt like an inevitable storm. The night passed slowly. Mika's mind raced with questions, Bjorn prepared for the inevitable, and the bikers, fueled by anger and pride, plotted their revenge. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the stage was set for a confrontation none of them could avoid. The early morning sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Bjorn sat outside the shed he had claimed as a temporary refuge, the cool breeze brushing against his face. His hands rested on his knees as he stared into the distance, his mind drifting to a past he had tried to leave behind. The world he once knew was not so different from the one he faced now, a place of conflict, pride, and the constant struggle for survival. But back then, the battles he fought were not physical. They were battles of the heart and mind. Bjorn had not always been a warrior. Once he was simply a man with a deep love for history. Years ago, he had been a professor at a small university, lecturing on ancient civilizations and Norse mythology. His classrooms were always full, students eager to hear his passionate recounting of Viking sagas and their way of life. He was more than a teacher. He was a storyteller, breathing life into long-forgotten tales of heroism and honor. But that life shattered when tragedy struck. Bjorn's wife, Elise, was taken from him in a car accident on a snowy winter's night. Her loss left an emptiness that no lecture or book could fill. Grief consumed him, pulling him into a spiral of despair. He left his position at the university, unable to face the students who reminded him of the life he had lost. It was during those dark months that Bjorn discovered Viking reenactments, a world where he could immerse himself in the history he loved while finding a new sense of purpose. The first time he donned a tunic, hefted a shield, and grasped a sword, he felt a spark of something long dormant. The reenactments became more than a hobby. They became a lifeline, a way to channel his pain into something tangible. Through this new life, he learned not only the physical skills of a Viking warrior but also the philosophy that guided them: honor, resilience, and the belief that one's strength came from within. These principles helped him rebuild himself, piece by piece, but even as he found a semblance of peace, there was always a part of him that remained haunted by what he had lost. Bjorn sighed, running a hand through his hair as the memories subsided. The forest around him was quiet, save for the distant chirping of birds. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. The bikers would come looking for him, and he needed to be ready. In town, Mika sat at her desk, the leather-bound notebook open before her. The symbols and sketches had captivated her all night, each page revealing new mysteries. She had spent hours researching the runes, cross-referencing them with online sources, and piecing together fragments of their meaning. Words like courage, endurance, and balance appeared repeatedly, woven into what seemed to be a code of living. The more she read, the more she felt connected to the man who had dropped the notebook. Bjorn was not just a fighter. He was a scholar, someone who had dedicated himself to understanding the past and applying its lessons to the present. But what had driven him to live this way? What had shaped him into the man who stood against the bikers with such calm resolve? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mika's roommate, Emily, poked her head inside, a curious look on her face. "You've been in here all night. What's going on?" Mika hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I found something interesting. It belongs to someone I met last night." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Met? You mean during that fight at the gas station?" "Yeah," Mika admitted. "But it's more than that. He left this behind, and I think there's a lot more to him than I realized." Emily stepped closer, glancing at the notebook. "Runes. Is this some kind of fantasy thing?" "No," Mika said quickly. "It's real. These are ancient Norse symbols. He's not just pretending to be a Viking. He studied this. Lived it." Emily frowned. "And you're sure you want to get involved with someone who fights bikers for fun?" "He didn't start the fight," Mika said firmly. "He was protecting himself. And there's something about him. I don't know how to explain it, but I think he's carrying something heavy." Emily sighed. "Just be careful, okay? This sounds like the kind of thing that could get messy." "I will," Mika promised, though her resolve only deepened. She had to know more. Bjorn spent the rest of the morning fortifying his position. He gathered branches and stones to create makeshift defenses around the shed, his movements methodical. His years of training in Viking combat had taught him the value of preparation. Every swing of an axe, every shield maneuver had been drilled into him until it was second nature. Now, those skills would serve him once more. As he worked, he thought about Mika. Her courage at the gas station had been remarkable, but it also worried him. She didn't know the danger she had stepped into. The bikers wouldn't forget her involvement, and he feared they might use her to get to him. By midday, the shed was as secure as he could make it. Bjorn stood back surveying his work. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The bikers would come, and when they did, he would be ready. Mika, too, felt the weight of what was to come. She tucked the notebook into her bag and set out on foot, her mind racing. She had questions that only Bjorn could answer, and she wasn't going to wait for him to come back to town. With determination in her step, she headed toward the forest, following a trail she had seen his truck take the night before. As the day wore on, their paths grew closer. Bjorn prepared for a battle he couldn't avoid, while Mika sought answers to the questions that burned in her mind. Both knew that the events of the past night had set something into motion, something that would change their lives in ways neither could predict. The early morning sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Bjorn sat outside the shed he had claimed as a temporary refuge, the cool breeze brushing against his face. His hands rested on his knees as he stared into the distance, his mind drifting to a past he had tried to leave behind. The world he once knew was not so different from the one he faced now, a place of conflict, pride, and the constant struggle for survival. But back then, the battles he fought were not physical. They were battles of the heart and mind. Bjorn had not always been a warrior. Once, he was simply a man with a deep love for history. Years ago, he had been a professor at a small university, lecturing on ancient civilizations and Norse mythology. His classrooms were always full, students eager to hear his passionate recounting of Viking sagas and their way of life. He was more than a teacher. He was a storyteller, breathing life into long-forgotten tales of heroism and honor. But that life shattered when tragedy struck. Bjorn's wife, Elise, was taken from him in a car accident on a snowy winter's night. Her loss left an emptiness that no lecture or book could fill. Grief consumed him, pulling him into a spiral of despair. He left his position at the university, unable to face the students who reminded him of the life he had lost. It was during those dark months that Bjorn discovered Viking reenactments, a world where he could immerse himself in the history he loved while finding a new sense of purpose. The first time he donned a tunic, hefted a shield, and grasped a sword, he felt a spark of something long dormant. The reenactments became more than a hobby. They became a lifeline, a way to channel his pain into something tangible. Through this new life, he learned not only the physical skills of a Viking warrior but also the philosophy that guided them: honor, resilience, and the belief that one's strength came from within. These principles helped him rebuild himself, piece by piece. But even as he found a semblance of peace, there was always a part of him that remained haunted by what he had lost. Bjorn sighed, running a hand through his hair as the memories subsided. The forest around him was quiet, save for the distant chirping of birds. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. The bikers would come looking for him, and he needed to be ready. In town, Mika sat at her desk, the leather-bound notebook open before her. The symbols and sketches had captivated her all night, each page revealing new mysteries. She had spent hours researching the runes, cross-referencing them with online sources, and piecing together fragments of their meaning. Words like courage, endurance, and balance appeared repeatedly, woven into what seemed to be a code of living. The more she read, the more she felt connected to the man who had dropped the notebook. Bjorn was not just a fighter. He was a scholar, someone who had dedicated himself to understanding the past and applying its lessons to the present. But what had driven him to live this way? What had shaped him into the man who stood against the bikers with such calm resolve? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mika's roommate, Emily, poked her head inside, a curious look on her face. "You've been in here all night. What's going on?" Mika hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I found something interesting. It belongs to someone I met last night." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Met? You mean during that fight at the gas station?" "Yeah," Mika admitted, "but it's more than that. He left this behind, and I think there's a lot more to him than I realized." Emily stepped closer, glancing at the notebook. "Runes. Is this some kind of fantasy thing?" "No," Mika said quickly. "It's real. These are ancient Norse symbols. He's not just pretending to be a Viking. He studied this. Lived it." Emily frowned. "And you're sure you want to get involved with someone who fights bikers for fun?" He didn't start the fight, Mika said firmly. He was protecting himself, and there's something about him. I don't know how to explain it, but I think he's carrying something heavy. Emily sighed. Just be careful, okay? This sounds like the kind of thing that could get messy. I will, Mika promised, though her resolve only deepened. She had to know more. Bjorn spent the rest of the morning fortifying his position. He gathered branches and stones to create makeshift defenses around the shed, his movements methodical. His years of training in Viking combat had taught him the value of preparation. Every swing of an axe, every shield maneuver had been drilled into him until it was second nature. Now, those skills would serve him once more. As he worked, he thought about Mika. Her courage at the gas station had been remarkable, but it also worried him. She didn't know the danger she had stepped into. The bikers wouldn't forget her involvement, and he feared they might use her to get to him. By midday, the shed was as secure as he could make it. Bjorn stood back surveying his work. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The bikers would come, and when they did, he would be ready. Mika, too, felt the weight of what was to come. She tucked the notebook into her bag and set out on foot, her mind racing. She had questions that only Bjorn could answer, and she wasn't going to wait for him to come back to town. With determination in her step, she headed toward the forest, following a trail she had seen his truck take the night before. As the day wore on, their paths grew closer. Bjorn prepared for a battle he couldn't avoid, while Mika sought answers to the questions that burned in her mind. Both knew that the events of the past night had set something into motion, something that would change their lives in ways neither could predict. The dimly lit bar hummed with tension as the bikers huddled together in their usual corner booth. Jace sat at the center, his imposing figure leaning forward, hands clenched into fists on the sticky table. His nose was still swollen from the punch Bjorn had delivered, a reminder of their humiliating encounter. Around him, the other bikers murmured, exchanging glances but avoiding his glare. "This isn't over," Jace growled, his voice low and dangerous. "That Viking freak made fools out of us, and if we don't put him in his place, everyone's going to know." "Jace," Todd, one of the older bikers, began cautiously. "You saw what he did. The guy's not normal. Maybe we should let it go." "Let it go?" Jace snapped. "Do you know what that'll do to our reputation? People already think we're soft." He leaned forward, his expression hard. "We can't let this slide." The others shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement, while others kept their heads down. Tyler, one of the younger members, spoke up hesitantly. "What's the plan? He's not exactly easy to track." Jace smirked. "We don't need to track him. He'll come to us." "How?" Todd asked. "Leverage," Jace said simply. "That girl from the gas station, Mika, she knows him. She'll lead us right to him." The table fell silent. Even Jace's most loyal followers seemed uneasy about involving Mika. Tyler frowned. "She doesn't seem like she's part of this." "She made herself part of it when she stood up for him," Jace replied coldly. "Now she's a loose end. We use her to get to him, and once we've dealt with the Viking, we'll deal with her." Mika walked through the forest, the notebook tucked securely in her bag. She had set out early that morning, following the trail she had seen Bjorn's truck take. Her curiosity had grown overnight, fueled by the pages of runes and sketches she had studied. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to find them sitting at her desk. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Mika felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she navigated the winding path. The deeper she went, the more isolated she felt, the trees closing in around her. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, half expecting to see the bikers lurking behind her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of snapping twigs ahead. Mika froze, her heart pounding. A figure emerged from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably Bjorn. He carried an axe in one hand, its blade glinting in the sunlight. His eyes scanned the forest, alert and wary. Mika stepped out cautiously, raising her hands. "Bjorn," she called softly. He turned sharply, his stance defensive. When he saw her, his expression softened. "Mika," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said, stepping closer. "I need to talk to you." She reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook. "You left this." Bjorn's eyes widened as he took the notebook from her. "You found it?" "You left it at the gas station," Mika explained. "I read some of it. I had to know more." Bjorn flipped through the pages, his expression somber. "This is important to me," he said quietly. "Thank you." Mika hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Who are you, Bjorn? Why do you live like this?" Bjorn sighed, closing the notebook and tucking it into his belt. "It's a long story," he said, "and not one I'm sure you're ready to hear." "Try me," Mika said firmly. "I think I've earned that much." Bjorn studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but not here. Follow me." In the bar, Tyler lingered after the others had left. Jace's plan weighed heavily on his mind. He didn't like the idea of dragging Mika into their feud, and he especially didn't like the way Jace had talked about her as if she were disposable. Tyler wasn't blind to the gang's darker tendencies, but this felt like a step too far. He sat at the counter, nursing a beer and staring at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The man looking back at him seemed like a stranger, tired, conflicted, and unsure of his place in the world. For years, Tyler had followed Jace without question, but now, for the first time, he felt the weight of doubt. As the sun dipped lower, Bjorn led Mika to the shed. The clearing around it was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of pine. He gestured for her to sit on a fallen log, then sat across from her, resting his hands on his knees. "You asked who I am," Bjorn began, his voice steady. "The truth is, I'm just a man trying to live by the values I believe in. The Vikings weren't just warriors. They were thinkers, builders, and people who understood the importance of community. After I lost my wife, I needed something to hold on to, and I found it in their stories." Mika listened intently, her heart aching at the mention of his wife. She wanted to ask more, but she held back, letting him speak at his own pace. "But living this way has consequences," Bjorn continued. "It makes people like Jace see me as a threat. He's not going to stop until he proves he's stronger. And now, because you're here, you're in danger too." "I can take care of myself," Mika said, her voice firm. Bjorn gave her a small, sad smile. "I admire your courage, but you don't understand what you're up against." As they spoke, shadows began to stretch across the forest floor. Unbeknownst to them, the bikers were already putting Jace's plan into motion. The fight was far from over. Bjorn stood outside the shed as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the treetops, casting the forest in a blanket of shadow. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Mika sat on the fallen log where they had spoken earlier, arms crossed tightly against the chill, her gaze fixed on Bjorn. She sensed the weight he carried, thoughts simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You live by their code, don't you?" Mika asked, breaking the silence. "The Vikings, I mean. It's not just an act for you." Bjorn nodded slowly, his gaze on the horizon. "It's more than just a code. It's a way of being. The Vikings believed in honor, strength, and resilience, but they also valued balance. Strength isn't just about winning fights. It's knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Mika frowned, her thoughts lingering on the bikers. "But you didn't walk away last night. You fought them." "I did," Bjorn admitted, "because walking away wasn't an option. Sometimes honor requires action, but even then, it's about how you fight. The Vikings fought with purpose, not pride or rage. That's the difference." His words stirred something in Mika. She thought back to the fight at the gas station, to Bjorn's controlled precision. It wasn't reckless or fueled by anger. It was deliberate, calculated, almost noble. Do you think the bikers understand that? She asked. Bjorn's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Jace doesn't care about honor, he cares about power, and that's why he's dangerous. As night fell, they moved into the shed. Bjorn lit a small lantern, its flickering glow casting shadows across the cramped space. He unrolled a parchment on the floor, revealing intricate diagrams and runes. Mika leaned closer, curious. What is this? Plans, Bjorn replied. Strategies for defense. The Vikings mastered using their environment to their advantage. They didn't just charge into battle, they prepared. Mika studied the diagrams, noting traps and fortifications. You think they'll come here? It's only a matter of time, Bjorn said. Jace won't let this go. He'll come looking for me. When he does, I'll be ready. What about me? Mika asked. What should I do? Bjorn's expression softened. This isn't your fight. It is now, Mika said firmly. They saw me at the gas station. They know I stood up to them. If I go back to town, they'll come after me. I'd rather be here, where I can help. Bjorn studied her, then nodded. If you're staying, you'll need to learn how to defend yourself. The next morning, Bjorn began training Mika. They stood in a clearing near the shed, sunlight filtering through the trees. Bjorn handed her a wooden staff, its surface smooth but sturdy. Balance is the first thing you need to understand, Bjorn said. Without it, you're vulnerable. Mika held the staff awkwardly, her stance uncertain. Bjorn stepped behind her, adjusting her grip and shifting her feet. Feel your center of gravity. Stay grounded. She nodded, her expression determined. Bjorn demonstrated basic moves, blocks, strikes, and parries, then guided Mika through each one. At first, her movements were clumsy, but she improved quickly, her natural agility helping her adapt. You're a fast learner, Bjorn remarked as Mika executed a clean block. I used to play volleyball, she said with a small smile. Bjorn chuckled. That helps. Reflexes and coordination are as important as strength. As Mika practiced, she began to notice how each movement required focus and precision. It wasn't just about strength, it was about control. For the first time, she felt a sense of empowerment, the realization that she wasn't as helpless as she thought. By the time they took a break, Mika was sweating and out of breath, but a spark of confidence shone in her eyes. In town, Jace gathered reinforcements from nearby chapters. The bar was packed with bikers, their voices low and ominous as they discussed their plans. Jace stood at the center, his presence commanding. We're not just going after him, Jace announced, his voice cutting through the noise. We're sending a message. Nobody crosses us and gets away with it. Tyler lingered at the edge of the room, unease twisting his gut. He had seen what Bjorn was capable of, and he knew this wouldn't end well. More than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that involving Mika was wrong. As the bikers roared their agreement, Tyler slipped out of the bar, his mind racing. He didn't know what he could do, but he couldn't stand by and watch this escalate. By evening, Mika and Bjorn sat around a small fire outside the shed. Mika leaned back against a log, her muscles sore but her spirits high. I didn't think I'd be learning to fight when I woke up yesterday, she said with a wry smile. Life has a way of surprising us, Bjorn replied. His tone was light, but his eyes were distant. What are you thinking about? Mika asked. Bjorn hesitated, then said, The fight that's coming. Jace won't stop and I don't want you caught in the middle of it. I told you I'm staying, Mika said firmly. I'm not afraid. You should be, Bjorn said quietly. Fear isn't weakness, Mika. It's what keeps us alive. Mika stared into the fire, her resolve hardening. Then I'll use it to fight. Bjorn's lips twitched into a faint smile. You remind me of someone I used to know. As the fire burned low, silence settled over them. Both knew the peace of the forest wouldn't last. The bikers were coming, and when they did, it would take everything they had to stand against them. The morning sun pierced through the forest canopy, illuminating the clearing where Bjorn stood with his axe in hand. He gazed around the area, analyzing every detail of the terrain with the meticulous eye of a strategist. Beside him, Mika held a notebook she had grabbed from the shed, jotting down Bjorn's instructions as he explained his plan. "First, we need to use the forest to our advantage," Bjorn said, his tone firm. "The Vikings didn't fight enemies head-on unless they had to. They used traps, ambushes, and the environment. We'll do the same." Mika nodded, scribbling notes. "What kind of traps are we talking about?" Bjorn pointed to a fallen tree nearby. "Deadfalls. We'll use logs and branches to create barriers. If they come through here, we'll slow them down." He gestured toward a narrow path between the trees. "This is a natural choke point. We can funnel them into this area and control the fight." "Got it," Mika said, her eyes scanning the clearing. "What about weapons? Do we have enough?" Bjorn set his axe down and picked up a pile of sturdy branches he had collected earlier. "We'll make spears and stakes. Simple, but effective. The key is to keep them at a distance." As they worked, Bjorn instructed Mika on how to sharpen the branches into pointed stakes. She followed his lead, her hands blistering as she gripped the knife, but she didn't complain. Determination drove her, and she was quickly learning that the physical work was as much about focus as it was about strength. By midday, the clearing had transformed into a fortified camp. Deadfall traps lined the perimeter, and sharpened stakes were embedded in the ground to create a defensive barrier. Bjorn inspected their work, his expression grim but satisfied. "This will slow them down," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "but it won't stop them completely. When they come, we'll need to be ready to fight." Mika looked at him, her face resolute. "I'm ready." Bjorn studied her for a moment before nodding. "You're brave, Mika. But courage alone won't win this fight. Keep your mind clear and remember what I taught you." Mika's lips tightened into a determined line. "I will," she said. Back in town, Tyler sat on his motorcycle in the alley behind the bar, his mind racing. The bikers were inside, finalizing their plans for the attack. Jace's voice boomed over the sound of clinking beer bottles and muffled cheers. But Tyler couldn't bring himself to join them. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment he considered calling the police, but he knew that wouldn't stop Jace. The gang leader had too much sway, too many connections. Instead, Tyler thought about Mika and Bjorn, two people caught in the crossfire of Jace's obsession. Finally, he made his decision. He slid his phone back into his pocket, revved the engine of his bike, and sped off toward the forest. If he couldn't stop Jace, maybe he could warn Bjorn before it was too late. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Bjorn and Mika sat near the fire taking a brief moment to rest. The day had been exhausting, and the weight of what lay ahead was palpable. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" Mika asked, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "They might," Bjorn replied, "or they might wait until morning. Either way, we need to be ready." Mika nodded, her hands gripping the staff she had trained with earlier. "I won't let them scare me off," she said. Bjorn gave her a small, approving smile. "You've come a long way, Mika. Most people would have run by now." "I'm not most people," she said, determination flashing in her eyes. Before Bjorn could respond, the sound of an engine echoed through the forest. Both of them tensed, their hands reaching for weapons. Moments later, Tyler's motorcycle came into view, skidding to a stop near the edge of the clearing. Bjorn stepped forward, his axe in hand. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold. Tyler raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to fight," he said quickly. "I came to warn you." Mika stepped beside Bjorn, her eyes narrowing. "Warn us about what?" "Jace," Tyler said, his tone urgent. "He's bringing reinforcements, a lot of them. They're planning to hit you tonight." Bjorn's expression hardened. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because this isn't right," Tyler said, his voice rising. "Jace is obsessed. He doesn't care who gets hurt, and I'm not okay with that. I don't want any part of it." Bjorn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You did the right thing coming here, but if they're coming tonight, we don't have much time." Mika turned to Bjorn, her voice firm. "What do we do now?" "We stick to the plan," Bjorn said, "and we stay sharp." As darkness fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant howls. Bjorn and Mika took their positions, weapons in hand. Tyler stayed nearby, his nerves on edge as he watched the two of them prepare. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Bjorn quietly. "No," Bjorn admitted, "but we don't have a choice." The three of them waited in tense silence, the firelight casting flickering shadows across their faces. Each moment felt heavier than the last, the anticipation building like a storm. Somewhere deep in the forest, the sound of approaching motorcycles began to grow louder. The fight was coming, and they all knew it. But in that moment, there was no room for fear, only resolve. The forest was dark, the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the canopy casting ghostly shadows on the ground. The distant rumble of motorcycles grew louder, a menacing sound that made the air seem heavier with each passing moment. Bjorn crouched behind a cluster of thick bushes, his axe resting in his hand, his muscles tense and ready. Beside him, Mika gripped her wooden staff tightly, her knuckles white with fear and determination. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the approaching roar. Bjorn nodded. "Stay low. Remember what I told you. Use the environment. Don't fight head-on unless you have no choice." Mika swallowed hard and nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the crack of branches and the crunch of gravel as the bikers dismounted from their motorcycles and began moving through the forest. "Spread out," Jace's voice growled in the distance. "Find him. Make him regret ever crossing us." The first trap was sprung within minutes. One of the bikers stepped onto a carefully concealed deadfall, triggering a cascade of branches and logs that crashed down from above, pinning him to the ground. His shout of pain echoed through the trees, followed by the startled yells of his comrades. "Watch where you step," another biker shouted. "This place is rigged." Bjorn allowed himself a grim smile as he signaled Mika to move. The two of them crept silently through the underbrush, their movements swift and precise. The traps they had set earlier in the day were working, slowing the bikers' advance and throwing them into disarray. Near the choke point, Bjorn had identified another trap activated. A hidden pit lined with sharpened stakes claimed its first victim, a biker who had wandered too far from the group. His scream sent a wave of unease through the remaining bikers. "Stay together," Jace barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't let him pick us off one by one." Tyler lingered near the back of the group, his eyes scanning the forest with growing anxiety. He hadn't expected Bjorn's defenses to be this effective. Every step the bikers took seemed to lead them deeper into danger, and Tyler knew it was only a matter of time before someone was seriously hurt, or worse. "Jace, this is a mistake," Tyler called out, his voice shaking. "We should pull back." Jace turned on him, his face twisted with fury. "You want to run? Go ahead, but don't come crawling back when this is over." Tyler clenched his fists, his stomach churning. He didn't want to abandon the group, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap they couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Bjorn and Mika reached their fallback position, a narrow ridge overlooking the clearing where the bikers were now gathering. Bjorn gestured for Mika to stay low as he surveyed the scene below. "They're regrouping," he said quietly. "Jace is trying to keep them together, but they're rattled. We need to take advantage of that." "How?" Mika asked, her voice trembling slightly. Bjorn turned to her, his expression calm but serious. "Distraction. If we can split them up again, we'll have a better chance of taking them down one by one." Mika nodded, gripping her staff tighter. "What do you need me to do?" "Create noise," Bjorn said. "Throw rocks, break branches, anything to make them think we're moving around them. I'll handle the rest." Mika hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She slipped away into the shadows, her movements quiet but deliberate. A few moments later, the sound of snapping branches and rustling leaves echoed through the forest, drawing the bikers' attention. "They're over there," one of the bikers shouted, rushing toward the noise. Bjorn seized the opportunity. He moved swiftly, his axe a blur as he ambushed the nearest biker, disarming him with a single strike before knocking him unconscious. Another biker turned just in time to see Bjorn advancing, but the Viking's sheer strength and skill were overwhelming. Mika watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding as she saw Bjorn in action. He moved with a grace and precision that was almost otherworldly, his every motion calculated and efficient. For a moment, she felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could actually win this. But then, she heard the unmistakable roar of Jace's voice. "Enough of this," he bellowed, his massive frame emerging from the shadows. He held a crowbar in one hand, his expression twisted with rage. "Bjorn!" Jace shouted. "You want to play games? Let's settle this man to man." Bjorn stepped forward, his axe at his side. "I've already beaten you once, Jace. Walk away while you still can." "Not this time," Jace growled, raising the crowbar. "This time, I finish what I started." The two men circled each other, their movements slow and deliberate. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the standoff unfolded. Mika clenched her staff, ready to intervene if needed, but she knew this was Bjorn's fight. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. Jace swung the crowbar with wild, furious energy, but Bjorn's calm precision kept him just out of reach. Every time Jace attacked, Bjorn countered, his axe deflecting the blows with ease. "Is this all you've got?" Bjorn taunted, his voice steady despite the intensity of the fight. Jace roared in frustration, lunging at Bjorn with renewed fury. This time, Bjorn sidestepped the attack and delivered a swift, calculated strike to Jace's arm, sending the crowbar flying. Jace stumbled back, clutching his injured arm, but his defiance didn't waver. "This isn't over," he spat. "It is," Bjorn said, his voice cold. "Take your men and leave. If you come back, you won't get another chance." For a moment, it seemed as though Jace might refuse, but the pain in his arm and the chaos surrounding him were enough to break through his pride. He turned to his remaining men and barked an order. "Fall back!" As the sound of retreating motorcycles faded into the night, Mika emerged from her hiding spot and approached Bjorn. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Bjorn nodded, his breathing heavy but steady. "We won," he said simply. Mika let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through her. "I can't believe we actually did it." Bjorn gave her a small smile. "You did well, Mika. You were brave." Tyler stepped forward hesitantly, his expression filled with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." Bjorn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You did the right thing in the end. That's what matters." The three of them stood in the clearing, the forest around them silent once more. They had survived the night, but they knew the fight wasn't truly over. Jace would return, and when he did, they would need to be ready. The forest was eerily quiet after the bikers retreated, their rumbling engines fading into the distance. Bjorn stood at the edge of the clearing, his axe resting in his hand, his eyes scanning the trees as if expecting an ambush. Mika leaned against a nearby tree, her wooden staff clutched tightly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "They'll be back," Bjorn said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Mika nodded, still catching her breath. "Do you think Jace will stop after this?" "No," Bjorn replied, his tone grim. "Men like Jace don't stop. They regroup, and they come back stronger." Tyler, who had been lingering a few steps behind them, stepped forward hesitantly. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "What do we do now?" "We leave," Bjorn said. "We can't stay here. The forest has too many weaknesses. If they return with more men, we won't be able to hold them off." It didn't take long for Bjorn and Mika to gather their belongings. The traps they had set were dismantled quickly. the remnants of their makeshift camp packed into a few bags. Tyler watched them silently, his guilt weighing heavily on him. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "I didn't know it would come to this. I thought—" Bjorn turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You thought Jace wouldn't go this far?" Tyler nodded. "I knew he was obsessed, but this is different." Bjorn studied him for a moment before speaking. "You can't change what's already happened, but you can decide what kind of man you want to be moving forward." Tyler swallowed hard and nodded. "I want to help." "Then help us get out of here," Bjorn said, "and if Jace comes back, you can warn us." By mid-morning, the three of them were deep in the forest, moving swiftly but cautiously. Bjorn led the way, his axe slung over his shoulder, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. Mika followed close behind, her staff in hand, while Tyler brought up the rear, his motorcycle left behind to avoid detection. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, the forest alive with the distant calls of birds and the rustle of leaves. Despite the relative calm, tension hung thick in the air, each step a reminder of the danger they were trying to escape. "Where are we going?" Mika asked finally, her voice breaking the silence. "There's an abandoned cabin not far from here," Bjorn said without looking back. "It's remote enough to give us some time to plan our next move." "Do you think they'll find us?" Mika pressed. "They'll try," Bjorn admitted, "but we'll be ready." The cabin was exactly as Bjorn remembered, small, weathered, and half hidden by overgrown foliage. The roof sagged slightly and the windows were cracked, but it was sturdy enough to provide shelter. Mika wrinkled her nose as they stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and cobwebs clung to the corners of the ceiling. "Cozy," she said dryly. Bjorn ignored the comment and began clearing the space, pushing aside broken furniture and debris. "It's not much, but it'll do for now. Tyler, check the perimeter. Make sure there's nothing we missed." Tyler nodded and disappeared outside, leaving Mika and Bjorn alone in the dimly lit cabin. Mika set her bag down and looked around, her hands on her hips. "Do you ever stop?" she asked, watching Bjorn work. "Stopping isn't an option," Bjorn replied. "Not until this is over." Mika sighed and leaned against the wall. "Do you ever think about why you're doing this? Why you're still fighting?" Bjorn paused, his hands resting on the edge of an overturned table. "Every day," he said quietly. "But it's not about me. It's about protecting people like you from men like Jace." Mika frowned. "People like me?" Bjorn straightened and looked at her, his expression softening. "People who still have something to fight for, something to lose." As the afternoon wore on, the cabin slowly began to take shape as a livable space. Tyler returned with a small supply of berries and herbs he had foraged, and Mika managed to start a fire in the old stone hearth. The three of them sat around the fire as dusk fell, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. "This isn't what I expected," Mika said after a long silence. "What did you expect?" Bjorn asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but not this. Not running, hiding, and waiting for the next fight." Bjorn nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It's not an easy life, but it's the one we have now." Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Bjorn and Mika. "Do you think there's a way out of this? A way to end it?" Bjorn's jaw tightened. "There's always a way. But it won't be easy. Jace won't stop until he gets what he wants, and the only way to end this is to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." "And how do we do that?" Mika asked. Bjorn's eyes met hers, his gaze steady. "We fight smart, and we fight together." As night fell, the three of them settled into uneasy rest. Bjorn sat by the fire, his axe resting beside him, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Mika slept fitfully on a makeshift bed of blankets, while Tyler dozed in a corner, his back against the wall. The forest outside was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. But even in the stillness, Bjorn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He tightened his grip on the axe and stared into the darkness, his mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, and if they were going to survive, they would need to be ready for whatever came next. The bar was unusually quiet, the low hum of voices and clinking glasses a far cry from the usual chaos that defined Jace's gang. The bikers sat in scattered groups, their expressions a mix of unease and frustration. Tyler's absence hadn't gone unnoticed, and his sudden disappearance during the raid had raised questions that no one dared voice. Jace stood at the head of the room, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the group. His arm was still bandaged from his fight with Bjorn, but his demeanor was as fiery as ever. He slammed a fist on the table, silencing the murmurs. "What happened last night was unacceptable," he growled. "We were outsmarted by that Viking freak. He played us like fools, and now he's on the run." Todd, one of the older bikers, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Jace, maybe we need to take a step back. Think this through." "Think what through?" Jace snapped, his eyes narrowing. "He humiliated us. Twice. If we don't put him in his place, our reputation is finished." A few bikers muttered in agreement, but others exchanged wary glances. The raid had shaken their confidence, and some were beginning to question whether Jace's obsession was worth the risk. Tyler sat on the edge of a creek deep in the forest, his head in his hands. The events of the past night played over and over in his mind, each memory sharper than the last. He had seen the fear in Mika's eyes, the determination in Bjorn's stance, and the chaos Jace had brought to the forest. For years, Tyler had followed Jace without question. He had joined the gang young, looking for a sense of belonging, a purpose. At first, it had seemed like the answer: camaraderie, adrenaline, and a code, however flawed. But now, he felt the cracks in that foundation. Jace's obsession wasn't about loyalty or justice, it was about power and control. Tyler looked at his reflection in the water, the man staring back at him a stranger. He thought of Mika's courage, Bjorn's calm strength. Could he find the courage to make a different choice? Back at the bar, Jace continued to rally his men, but his usual fire was met with less enthusiasm. Todd, emboldened by the silence, spoke up again. "Maybe Bjorn's not the problem," Todd said cautiously. "Maybe it's us. We keep chasing him, and every time we come up short, it's like he's trying to show us something we're too blind to see." Jace's face darkened, and he took a threatening step toward Todd. "You saying I'm blind?" "I'm saying you're too caught up in your pride to see what this is doing to us," Todd shot back, his voice steady despite the tension. "Look around, Jace. The men are tired. They're questioning you." A murmur rippled through the group. Jace's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "If anyone else has something to say, now's your chance." The silence that followed was heavy, but it spoke volumes. The bikers were beginning to fracture, their loyalty to Jace waning in the face of his growing instability. As the night wore on, Tyler made his way back to the abandoned cabin where Bjorn and Mika had taken refuge. The forest was silent, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. Tyler's footsteps were slow and deliberate, his mind racing with doubts and questions. When he reached the cabin, Bjorn was waiting outside, his axe resting against his shoulder. Mika stood a few steps behind him, her wooden staff in hand. They both tensed as Tyler approached. "I'm not here to fight," Tyler said quickly, raising his hands. "I needed to get away. From Jace." Bjorn's expression softened slightly, but his stance remained firm. "Why?" "Because he's lost it," Tyler said. "The gang's falling apart. He's not leading us anymore. He's using us to fuel his vendetta against you. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Mika stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "And we're supposed to believe you?" Tyler met her gaze. "I don't blame you for not trusting me, but I'm here because I want to help. I can't go back to Jace, not after what I've seen, but maybe I can make things right by helping you." Bjorn studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You can stay. But if you try anything—" "I won't," Tyler interrupted. "You have my word." At the bar, Jace retreated to the back room, his frustration boiling over. He slammed his fists against the wall, the pain barely registering. He could feel the cracks in his authority widening, the loyalty of his men slipping through his fingers. But instead of reflecting, he doubled down. "If they don't want to follow me, I'll do it myself," he muttered, his voice low and venomous. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "I need backup. Bring the others. We're ending this once and for all." The voice on the other end gave a curt response, and Jace ended the call. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over, Bjorn," he growled. "Not by a long shot." Back at the cabin, the fire crackled softly as the three of them sat in uneasy silence. Tyler glanced between Bjorn and Mika, his nerves evident. Finally, he spoke. "Jace isn't going to stop," he said. "Even if the gang falls apart, he won't let this go. He's already called for more reinforcements. He'll come back stronger." Bjorn nodded, his expression grim. "Then we need to be stronger too." Mika looked at Bjorn, her eyes wide with concern. "What does that mean?" "It means preparing for the fight of our lives," Bjorn said. "Because when Jace comes back, it won't just be him, and this time there won't be any retreat." The three of them sat in the flickering firelight, the weight of Bjorn's words settling over them. They knew the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The dawn broke over the forest in soft hues of orange and gold, the mist clinging to the ground dissipating with the rising sun. Bjorn stood at the edge of the cabin's clearing, his axe balanced against his shoulder, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Sleep had been scarce. The weight of their next steps loomed large. Inside the cabin, Mika and Tyler stirred, their hushed voices barely audible. Tyler emerged first, his movements hesitant. His face was pale, and his expression carried the weariness of someone caught between guilt and resolve. He glanced at Bjorn, then looked away, unsure of how to begin. "Couldn't sleep?" Bjorn asked without turning. Tyler shook his head. "Not with everything hanging over us." He hesitated. "Thanks for letting me stay. I know I've got a lot to prove." "You do," Bjorn replied simply. "But words mean little. Actions matter more." The alliance between the three of them felt fragile. A thread stretched taut under the weight of uncertainty. Mika joined them outside a few moments later, clutching a mug of tea. She regarded Tyler with suspicion but said nothing. "We need a plan," Bjorn said, breaking the silence. "If Jace is regrouping, we can't just wait for him. We need to anticipate his moves." "What are you suggesting?" Mika asked. Bjorn looked at Tyler. "You still know the bikers' routes, don't you? Their safe houses, meeting spots?" Tyler nodded. "Yeah, but if I give you that information, Jace will know I betrayed him. He'll come after me harder than he's coming after you." "He's already coming for you," Bjorn said firmly. "This isn't about staying safe. It's about ending this before anyone else gets hurt." Tyler swallowed hard, then nodded. "There's a bar on the north side of town. If he's planning something big, he'll be meeting outside help there." Later that day, the three of them approached the edge of the town, where the bar Tyler had mentioned sat on a desolate stretch of road. The building was nondescript, its windows darkened, faint music escaping from within. Bjorn and Mika waited in the shadows while Tyler ventured closer. "You're sure this is a good idea?" Mika whispered. "No," Bjorn admitted. "But we need to know what we're up against. If Jace is consolidating his forces, we can't afford to be caught off guard." Tyler returned a few minutes later, his expression tense. "He's in there, and he's not alone." "How many?" Bjorn asked. 6, maybe 7, Tyler replied. "They're mercenaries, not gang members." Bjorn's jaw tightened. "Then we're running out of time." Inside the bar, Jace leaned against the counter, his injured arm in a sling. The men around him were grizzled and dangerous, their eyes sharp with calculation. They listened intently as Jace laid out his plan. "This isn't just about Bjorn anymore," Jace said. "He's got allies now. A girl and one of my men turned traitor. They're making this personal, so we're going to hit them where it hurts. No mercy." One of the mercenaries leaned forward, his scarred face splitting into a grin. "You pay. We'll take care of it. Doesn't matter who they are." Jace smirked. "Good, because this is the last time they'll cross me." Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler retreated to a wooded area to regroup. Tyler's face was pale, his hands trembling as he described what he had overheard. "They're not just after you anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "Jace wants to destroy everything connected to you. He's obsessed." Bjorn's expression darkened. "That makes him reckless. We can use that." Mika glanced at Bjorn. "How? He's got more men, and they're professionals. We can't fight them head-on." "We won't," Bjorn said. "We'll draw them out, make them fight on our terms, but first, we need to get them to come to us." Tyler hesitated. "I might have an idea. There's an old quarry outside town. It's isolated, and the terrain works in our favor. If we can lure them there—" Bjorn nodded. "That's a start. But we'll need more than just a good location. We'll need traps and diversions." Mika exhaled slowly. "Sounds like another long night." As they began to prepare, the tension between the three of them slowly began to ease. Tyler worked alongside Bjorn, his knowledge of the bikers' tactics proving invaluable. Mika focused on creating decoys and distractions. At one point, Tyler glanced at Mika and hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For everything." Mika looked up, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't change what happened," she said, "but it's a start." Tyler nodded. "I'll prove it. You'll see." Bjorn watched the exchange silently, his mind turning over the possibilities of what lay ahead. The truce was uneasy, but it was holding, for now. By nightfall, they had a rough plan. The quarry would be their battleground, the traps and diversions set to capitalize on the terrain. Bjorn stood at the center of their makeshift camp, his voice calm but commanding as he outlined their next steps. "We don't know exactly when they'll come," he said, "but when they do, we'll be ready. Stick to the plan and don't let them divide us. Together, we can end this." Mika and Tyler nodded, their determination evident despite the fear in their eyes. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew they couldn't back down. As the fire crackled softly, the three of them sat in silence, the weight of the coming battle pressing down on them. For the first time, they felt like a team, a fragile alliance forged in necessity. The night stretched on, the forest alive with nocturnal sounds. Bjorn's mind raced with contingencies, but his heart held firm. They would face Jace together, and this time there would be no turning back. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled patterns of light across the forest floor. Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler stood near the edge of the quarry, their gazes fixed on the vast expanse of rugged terrain. The quarry was surrounded by steep cliffs, with a narrow trail winding down to the rocky basin below. It was a natural fortress, one that offered both protection and risk. "We'll need to set traps along the perimeter," Bjorn said, his voice steady. "This place works to our advantage, but only if we use it wisely." Mika nodded, her brow furrowed. "We can use the loose rocks near the cliffs, create landslides if they try to come at us from above." Tyler, standing a few steps away, shifted uncomfortably. "Jace isn't stupid. He'll send scouts ahead. We need decoys to throw them off." Bjorn turned to him. "Then we'll give them something to find, but it won't be us." The three worked tirelessly through the day, transforming the quarry into a battlefield. Mika constructed crude traps, weaving branches and vines into tripwires that could trigger falling debris. Bjorn focused on fortifying their position, using logs and boulders to create barricades. Tyler proved his worth by mapping potential entry points. He guided Mika to an overhang for an ambush, his knowledge of the bikers' tactics invaluable. "Why are you helping us?" Mika asked as they worked side by side. Tyler hesitated. "Because I've seen what Jace is capable of, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." Mika studied him before nodding. "Just don't give us a reason to regret trusting you." Tyler sighed. "I've made my mistakes. This is my way of fixing some of them." By late afternoon, the quarry was a labyrinth of hidden dangers. Bjorn stood at the center of the basin, surveying their work with a critical eye. The traps were subtle, almost invisible to an untrained observer, but lethal to anyone who triggered them. "This will hold," he said, more to himself than to the others. "If they come head-on, they won't know what hit them." Mika approached, brushing dirt from her hands. "And if they figure it out?" "Then we adapt," Bjorn replied. "Strength isn't just muscle, it's about outthinking your enemy." Mika smirked. "You really live by that Viking code, don't you?" Bjorn chuckled. "It's not just a code, it's a way of life." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple, the three of them gathered around a small fire at the base of the quarry. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the tension in the air. "They'll come at night," Bjorn said, breaking the silence. "Jace knows we're here. He'll want the element of surprise." Tyler nodded, his jaw tight. "He'll bring everything he has. This isn't just about beating you. It's about making a statement." "Then we'll give him one he won't forget," Bjorn replied. Mika glanced between them, her expression pensive. "What happens after this? If we win?" Bjorn's gaze softened as he looked at her. "We rebuild. We find a way to move forward. But first, we survive." Tyler added, "Winning isn't just about stopping Jace. It's about showing him he doesn't get to control everything." Night fell swiftly, and with it came an eerie stillness. Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler took their positions, senses heightened as they waited for the inevitable. Bjorn crouched behind a barricade, his axe resting against his leg. Mika positioned near the overhang, her staff in hand, while Tyler kept watch near the trailhead. Hours passed, tension mounting with each moment. Then, faintly at first, came the low hum of engines. The sound grew louder, echoing off the quarry walls. The bikers had arrived. Bjorn signaled to the others, his hand clenched into a fist. Mika and Tyler nodded, their eyes reflecting a mix of fear and determination. The first wave of bikers entered cautiously, their headlights cutting through the darkness. They dismounted near the trailhead, their movements deliberate as they scanned the area. Bjorn watched closely, his grip tightening on his axe. "Wait for it," he murmured. One of the bikers stepped onto a concealed tripwire, triggering a cascade of loose rocks from the cliff above. The sound was thunderous, sending bikers scrambling. Two were caught in the debris, their shouts echoing through the quarry. The others reacted quickly, drawing weapons and shouting orders. But the chaos worked to Bjorn's advantage. As they regrouped, he launched himself into the fray, his axe a blur of motion. Mika and Tyler joined the fight, their traps sowing confusion. Mika's staff cracked against one biker's ribs, sending him sprawling, while Tyler used the terrain to outmaneuver his former comrades. Despite their efforts, the bikers pressed on. But Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler fought with a unity born of necessity, their resolve unyielding. As the battle raged, the tide began to shift. The bikers, disoriented and battered, started to retreat, their confidence eroded by the resistance. Jace, watching from the shadows, clenched his fists in frustration. Bjorn caught sight of him and called out, his voice ringing through the chaos. "Jace, face me, one-on-one." Jace hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Then, with a snarl, he stepped forward, his weapon gleaming in the firelight. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the course of everything to follow. The roar of the battle quieted, leaving an eerie stillness as Bjorn and Jace faced off in the center of the quarry. The firelight danced across their weapons, glinting off Jace's knife and Bjorn's axe. The surrounding cliffs seemed to loom closer, trapping the tension in the air. The bikers, battered and scattered, hesitated at the edges of the basin, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat. Jace stepped forward, his lips curled in a snarl. "You think you're better than me, Bjorn? You think you can walk into my world and teach me a lesson?" Bjorn stood tall, his axe resting lightly in his grip. "I didn't come here to teach you, but if you're looking for a lesson, Jace, I'll give you one." The two men began to circle each other, their movements deliberate. Jace's knife gleamed in the firelight, its edge sharp and menacing. Bjorn's axe, though heavier, radiated power and control. "I've watched men like you my whole life," Jace sneered. "Big talk, big ideals. But at the end of the day, it's the ones willing to get their hands dirty who win." Bjorn's gaze didn't waver. "Winning isn't just about strength, it's about honor, and you've got none." Jace lunged, his knife slicing through the air. Bjorn stepped aside, his movements fluid despite his size. The knife missed by inches, but Jace recovered quickly, spinning to face him again. The bikers watching from the edges murmured among themselves, their confidence in Jace wavering. This wasn't the unquestionable leader they'd followed. This was a man driven by rage and desperation. Mika and Tyler remained hidden near the barricades, their eyes fixed on the fight. Mika gripped her staff tightly, her knuckles white. "Do you think he can win?" she whispered. Tyler hesitated, his gaze shifting between Bjorn and Jace. "He has to," he said finally, "for all our sakes." Jace lunged again, this time with more precision. His knife caught Bjorn's arm, leaving a shallow cut. Blood beaded on Bjorn's skin, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he countered, his axe swinging in a controlled arc that forced Jace to stumble back. "Is that all you've got?" Bjorn asked, his tone calm, almost mocking. Jace's face twisted in fury. "I'll show you what I've got." He charged, knife raised, but Bjorn was ready. With a swift movement, he parried the attack, his axe knocking the knife from Jace's hand. The blade clattered to the ground, and for a moment, silence hung in the air. Jace staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You think this ends here?" he growled. "You think taking me down changes anything?" Bjorn advanced, his axe lowered but ready. "It changes everything. Your men are watching, Jace. They see what you've become. This isn't leadership. This is madness." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to Jace crumbling under the weight of Bjorn's words. One by one, they lowered their weapons, stepping back from the fight. Mika emerged from her hiding spot, her staff held at her side. She stood beside Bjorn, her presence a silent statement of unity. Tyler joined them moments later, his expression resolute. "This isn't over," Jace spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won, but you'll never get rid of me." Bjorn's gaze hardened. "It's over when you decide it is. Walk away, Jace. Leave this life behind." Jace hesitated, his body trembling with the effort to contain his fury. For a moment it seemed as though he might listen, but then, with a final snarl, he turned and stormed toward the edge of the quarry. The remaining bikers lingered, their expressions a mix of confusion and relief. Bjorn addressed them, his voice carrying across the basin. "You don't have to follow him. You have a choice. Make the right one." The bikers murmured among themselves before slowly dispersing. Some stayed behind, watching as Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler worked to dismantle the traps they'd set earlier. Others disappeared into the shadows, their allegiance to Jace broken. As the last of the bikers faded into the darkness, Mika turned to Bjorn. "Do you think he'll come back?" Bjorn sighed, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. "If he does, we'll be ready, but I don't think he will. He's lost his power over them." Tyler nodded, his expression somber. I never thought I'd see the day. Jace, he's not the man he used to be." Bjorn placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "None of us are the people we used to be. What matters is what we do now." As the bikers dispersed into the night, Mika knelt near the fire, tossing broken branches into the flames. "It's strange, isn't it?" she murmured. "How everything can feel like it's changing, even when it's all the same." Bjorn nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Change doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, painful sometimes, but it's worth it." Mika looked at him, her expression softening. "I think we've all changed a little tonight." Bjorn smiled faintly. "Then it was worth the fight." The three of them stood together at the center of the quarry, the firelight casting long shadows around them. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered, etched into the landscape and their memories. For the first time in days, there was a sense of peace. Bjorn looked at Mika and Tyler, his expression thoughtful. "We've got work to do. The fight may be over, but the real challenge is just beginning." Mika smiled faintly, her grip on her staff loosening. "Then let's get started." Together, they began the long walk back to the cabin, the dawn breaking once more over the forest. The world felt different, as though it had shifted on its axis, and in the quiet that followed, they allowed themselves to hope. The morning after Jace's retreat was quiet, but it carried an undercurrent of unease. Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler worked silently to clear the remnants of their battle in the quarry. The traps were dismantled, debris was pushed aside, and the site was left as pristine as they could manage. Despite their efforts, the tension lingered. "They won't give up," Bjorn said, breaking the silence as they loaded the last of their makeshift weapons into a cart. "Jace might be gone, but he's not done, and neither are we." Mika nodded, her expression grim. "Do you think he'll regroup? Try to come back with more?" Bjorn glanced at Tyler, who had been quiet all morning. "What do you think?" Tyler hesitated, then said, "Jace doesn't take failure lightly. If he's not planning revenge already, I'd be surprised." By midday, the three of them had returned to the cabin, the forest around them alive with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. The tranquility felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. Bjorn set to work reinforcing the cabin's defenses while Mika and Tyler scouted the area for signs of movement. Mika returned first, her face pale. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice tight. Bjorn followed her to a clearing a short distance from the cabin. There, in the dirt, were the unmistakable tracks of motorcycle tires. They were fresh, the edges of the prints sharp. "They're watching us," Bjorn murmured, his jaw tightening. "They know we're here." Tyler joined them moments later, his face grim. "This is bad. If they're scouting the area, it means they're planning something." "An ambush," Bjorn said. "They'll wait until we're vulnerable." That night, they prepared for the worst. Bjorn outlined a plan, his voice calm but firm as he spoke. "We don't wait for them to attack," he said. "We draw them out, make them show their hand. If we let them dictate the terms, we've already lost." "How do we do that?" Mika asked. "We give them what they're looking for," Bjorn replied. "A reason to move." Tyler frowned. "You're talking about baiting them. That's risky." "Everything about this is risky," Bjorn said, "but it's our best chance." As dawn broke, the three of them set their plan into motion. Tyler, posing as a lone scout, rode one of the bikers' abandoned motorcycles into a nearby town. He made sure to be seen, lingering near places Jace's men were known to frequent. The message was clear. The fight wasn't over. It didn't take long for the bait to work. By midday, Tyler spotted a group of bikers tailing him as he made his way back toward the cabin. He kept his movements deliberate, leading them through a winding trail that Bjorn and Mika had carefully trapped the night before. The bikers, sensing an opportunity, followed closely. Their engines roared as they closed the distance, but Tyler maintained his composure, guiding them toward the clearing where Bjorn and Mika waited. The ambush was sudden and precise. As the bikers entered the clearing, Bjorn and Mika sprang into action. Mika, hidden in the underbrush, triggered a tripwire that sent a cascade of logs tumbling onto the trail, blocking the bikers' exit. Bjorn, stationed on a nearby ridge, unleashed a barrage of rocks, forcing the bikers to scatter. Tyler, taking advantage of the chaos, abandoned the motorcycle and joined Mika in the underbrush. Together, they worked to disorient the bikers further, using slingshots and improvised projectiles to keep them off balance. The bikers, though numerous, were unprepared for the coordinated attack. One by one, they were forced to abandon their bikes, retreating into the forest in search of cover. Bjorn descended from the ridge, his axe gleaming in the sunlight. He moved with purpose, his strikes precise as he disabled the remaining bikers. Within minutes, the clearing was silent once more, save for the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Mika emerged from the underbrush, her staff in hand. She surveyed the scene, her chest heaving from exertion. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Bjorn nodded, his expression grim. "For now. But this was just a small group. Jace still has more men." Tyler joined them, his face pale but determined. "If this doesn't send a message, nothing will." "It will," Bjorn said, "but it won't stop him. Not yet." As they returned to the cabin, the weight of their situation settled over them. The victory in the clearing felt hollow, a reminder of the battles yet to come. Bjorn, ever pragmatic, began to plan their next move, his mind racing with contingencies. Mika, sensing his unease, placed a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "We'll face whatever comes together." Bjorn looked at her, his expression softening. "I know, and that's what gives me hope." The three of them sat together on the cabin's porch as the sun set, the sky ablaze with hues of orange and pink. The forest around them was quiet once more, but the tension lingered, a reminder of the storm that had yet to pass. Mika spoke softly, breaking the silence. "Do you think we'll ever see peace after all this?" Bjorn glanced at the fading light. "Peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, piece by piece." Tyler, sitting on the steps, added, "Maybe this is where it starts. Right here, with us." Bjorn nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Then, let's make it count." The days following the ambush were filled with an uneasy calm. Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler worked tirelessly to fortify the cabin and the surrounding forest, their every action driven by the knowledge that Jace's retaliation was inevitable. The weight of uncertainty hung heavy, but they moved forward, each finding their own way to cope with the pressure. Mika had taken to training daily, honing her skills with the staff Bjorn had fashioned for her. The smooth, sturdy wood felt natural in her hands, and with each swing and jab, she grew more confident. Bjorn watched her practice one morning, his expression thoughtful. "You're getting stronger," he said as she paused to catch her breath. Mika glanced at him, wiping sweat from her brow. "I have to be. There's no other choice." "There's always a choice," Bjorn replied, "but you've made the right one." Tyler, meanwhile, had thrown himself into scouting missions, using his knowledge of the area and the bikers' habits to gather information. Each time he returned, he brought back news of Jace's movements, piecing together a picture of the enemy's plans. It was on one such mission that he came back with troubling news. "They're recruiting," Tyler said as he entered the cabin, his face pale. "Jace is pulling in every ally he can find. This isn't just about us anymore. He's building an army." Bjorn's expression darkened. "Then we need to be ready." As the days turned to weeks, the trio settled into a routine, each of them contributing to their survival in their own way. But the tension was palpable, and Mika could feel it weighing on her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she approached Bjorn, her staff in hand. "Teach me," she said, her voice firm. Bjorn looked at her, his brow furrowing. "Teach you what?" "Everything," Mika replied. "I don't just want to survive this. I want to fight. I want to make a difference." Bjorn studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but it won't be easy." "I don't need easy," Mika said. "I need to be ready." The training sessions began the next morning. Bjorn took her to a clearing near the cabin, the early light filtering through the trees. He started with the basics, showing her how to hold the staff properly, how to balance her weight, how to strike with precision. "Fighting isn't just about strength," Bjorn said as Mika practiced her swings. "It's about control, discipline, knowing when to attack and when to wait." Mika listened intently, her movements growing more fluid with each repetition. The staff felt like an extension of herself, and as the hours passed, she began to understand the rhythm of the fight. "Good," Bjorn said as she completed a series of strikes. "But now comes the hard part." He stepped back, his axe in hand, and gestured for her to attack. Mika hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her staff swinging in a wide arc. Bjorn blocked the strike easily, his movements precise and controlled. "Faster," he said, "and don't telegraph your moves." Mika adjusted her stance, her eyes narrowing as she focused. She attacked again, this time with more speed, but Bjorn countered effortlessly. "Better," he said, "but you need to anticipate my movements. Watch my shoulders, my stance. They'll tell you what I'm about to do." The days turned into a blur of training and preparation. Mika's confidence grew with each session, her strikes more precise, her movements more fluid. She began to see the patterns Bjorn spoke of, the subtle shifts in his stance that hinted at his next move. One evening, as the sun set and the forest was bathed in golden light, Mika faced off against Bjorn once more. She moved with purpose, her strikes swift and controlled. Bjorn blocked her first attack, but she anticipated his counter, shifting her weight and striking again. This time, her staff connected, catching Bjorn off guard. He stumbled back slightly, a grin spreading across his face. "Now you're learning," he said, his voice filled with pride. Mika lowered her staff, her chest heaving. "I had a good teacher," she said with a faint smile. Tyler watched their training sessions from a distance, his expression a mix of admiration and unease. One evening, as Mika rested near the fire, he approached her. "You've changed," he said, his voice quiet. Mika looked up at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "You're not the same person who tried to stop that fight at the gas station," Tyler said. "You're stronger now, more confident." Mika shrugged. "I had to change. If I didn't, I wouldn't survive." Tyler nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe, but it's more than that. You're becoming someone people can rely on, someone who can lead." Mika looked away, her expression uncertain. "I don't know about that." "Well, I do," Tyler said, "and so does Bjorn." That night, as the stars filled the sky, Mika sat alone by the fire, her staff resting against her knee. The weight of Tyler's words lingered in her mind, filling her with a mix of pride and doubt. She thought back to the girl she had been before all of this, the girl who had tried to stop a fight she couldn't control. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had faced fear and found the courage to keep going. As the fire crackled softly, Mika made a silent promise to herself. She would not back down, not from Jace, not from the fight ahead, and not from the person she was becoming. The dawn brought new challenges, but Mika faced them with a renewed sense of purpose. The breakthrough she had achieved in her training was more than just physical. It was a transformation, a step toward the warrior she needed to be. Jace sat in the dimly lit back room of a rundown bar, nursing a drink that had long since gone warm. The television on the wall buzzed faintly, broadcasting a local news report about a fire in the nearby woods. The bartender glanced at him occasionally, uneasy under the weight of Jace's simmering rage. The room reeked of spilled beer and desperation. One of his lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, hesitated near the door before speaking. "The men are getting restless," he said. "They're saying we should cut our losses and move on." Jace's hand tightened around the glass, his knuckles white. "Move on," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I built this empire just to walk away?" The lieutenant flinched but held his ground. "It's not just me. They're saying Bjorn isn't like the others. He's different." "Different?" Jace stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "He's one man, one arrogant fool who thinks he can stand in my way." In the weeks since the ambush at the quarry, Jace's obsession with Bjorn had grown. He had spent hours poring over maps, plotting attacks, and barking orders at his men. But the gang that had once followed him without question was beginning to falter. The cracks in their loyalty were widening, and Jace's desperation only made them worse. "You think I don't know what they're saying?" Jace said, pacing the room. "That I've lost my edge? That I'm afraid?" He slammed his fist against the table, making the glasses rattle. "I'll show them fear." The lieutenant shifted uneasily. "What's the plan, then?" Jace's eyes glinted with a dangerous light. "We hit him where it hurts. We find his allies. That girl, the traitor. We'll make him watch as we tear everything he's built apart." Bjorn, meanwhile, was unaware of the storm brewing. He spent his days training Mika, preparing defenses, and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the looming threat. But Tyler's reports painted a grim picture. Jace's gang was still active, their movements erratic but purposeful. "They're spreading out," Tyler said one evening as the three of them sat around the fire. "I think he's looking for weaknesses. For us." "Let him look," Bjorn said. "He'll find nothing but a fight." Mika's eyes flicked to Tyler. "What about the others? The bikers who left him after the quarry? Are they still out there?" Tyler nodded. "Some of them, yeah. But they're scattered. Jace burned a lot of bridges. He's running out of people who will follow him." Bjorn leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Desperation makes people dangerous. We can't underestimate him." Jace's obsession drove him to increasingly reckless decisions. He led raids on small towns, hoping to draw Bjorn out, but each time he came up empty-handed, his rage grew. His men, once a tightly knit unit, began to question his leadership more openly. One night, as Jace sat alone in his makeshift headquarters, a younger member of the gang approached him cautiously. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Maybe we should what?" Jace snapped, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe we should back off, regroup, figure out a better plan," the young man said hesitantly. Jace was on him in an instant, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Back off," he snarled. "Is that what you want? To run? To let some wannabe Viking humiliate us?" The younger biker's face paled and he shook his head quickly. "No, boss, of course not." Jace released him with a shove, his chest heaving. "Get out of my sight," he growled. As the biker scrambled out of the room, Jace turned to the map on the table, his mind racing. Bjorn sensed the growing tension, even from a distance. The forest around the cabin had grown quieter, the usual hum of wildlife replaced by an eerie stillness. Mika noticed it too, her instincts sharpened by weeks of training. "They're getting closer," she said one morning as she and Bjorn patrolled the perimeter. "I can feel it." Bjorn nodded. "Jace is running out of options. He'll come at us soon." Mika hesitated before speaking. "Do you think we're ready?" "We have to be," Bjorn said simply. "And so does he." As Jace's plans took shape, his desperation reached a boiling point. He gathered his remaining loyalists for a final push, his voice ringing with a fervor that bordered on madness. "This isn't just about Bjorn," he said, pacing in front of the assembled bikers. "This is about us, about proving that we're stronger, smarter, better. He thinks he can outlast us? Let's show him what we're made of." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence in Jace waning. But his charisma, his ability to rally them in the face of doubt, kept them from walking away. "We move at dawn," Jace said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "And when it's over, they'll wish they'd never crossed me." That night, as the forest settled into darkness, Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler prepared for the inevitable. The cabin was fortified, the traps were set, and the three of them sat together in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Mika broke the silence, her voice steady but quiet. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm ready." Bjorn looked at her, his expression softening. "You've come a long way, Mika. We all have." Tyler nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "It's not just about survival anymore. It's about standing up for something." Bjorn's eyes flicked to the forest beyond the cabin. "Then let's make sure it counts." As the fire crackled softly, the three of them steeled themselves for what was to come. The storm Jace had been brewing was about to break, and they would face it head-on. The dawn broke with an eerie stillness, the forest shrouded in a thick mist that muted the world around the cabin. Bjorn stood on the porch, his axe resting against his shoulder, his eyes scanning the trees. Mika and Tyler were behind him, their movements quiet as they prepared for what they all knew was coming. The night had been restless, filled with the tension of anticipation. The traps were set, the defenses fortified, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on them all. Bjorn could feel it in the air. A storm brewing, a clash inevitable. "They're coming," Mika said softly as she joined him on the porch. Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "I can feel it." Bjorn nodded. "We'll face them together." The sound of engines shattered the stillness, growing louder with each passing moment. Bjorn stepped off the porch, his expression grim as he watched the bikers emerge from the mist. They came in waves, their headlights piercing through the fog, their numbers far greater than he had anticipated. Jace was at the front, his presence commanding as he dismounted his bike and surveyed the scene. He wore his fury like a cloak, his movements sharp and purposeful as he approached the cabin. The tension in the air was suffocating, the silence broken only by the low rumble of the idling engines. "Bjorn!" Jace's voice rang out, sharp and biting. "Enough games. Face me." Bjorn stepped forward, his grip tightening on his axe. "You've brought this on yourself, Jace. Walk away now, and no one else has to get hurt." Jace laughed bitterly. "Walk away? After everything you've done? No, this ends here." The bikers began to spread out, their movements deliberate as they encircled the cabin. Mika and Tyler took their positions, their weapons at the ready. Bjorn stood in the clearing, his eyes locked on Jace. "You want me, Jace? Here I am," Bjorn said, his voice steady. Jace grinned, his teeth bared like a predator. "Then, let's finish this." The fight began suddenly, explosively. Jace charged at Bjorn, his knife gleaming in the dim light. Bjorn met him head-on, his axe swinging with controlled precision. The clash of steel echoed through the clearing, the force of their blows sending sparks into the air. Mika and Tyler held their ground, fending off the bikers who tried to push past the traps. Mika moved with purpose, her staff striking with precision, while Tyler used the terrain to his advantage, leading their enemies into ambushes. But the focus of the battle remained on Bjorn and Jace, their fight a brutal display of strength and determination. Jace fought with raw aggression, his movements wild and unpredictable. Bjorn countered with calm precision, each strike measured and deliberate. Jace's knife slashed through the air, grazing Bjorn's arm and drawing blood. Bjorn didn't flinch, his focus unbroken as he pressed forward. He struck with his axe, the blade slicing through the fabric of Jace's jacket and leaving a deep gash along his side. "You're nothing but a bully, Jace," Bjorn said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "All your power comes from fear, but fear won't save you now." Jace snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. And what about you, Bjorn? You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a man playing dress-up, pretending to be something you're not." Bjorn's expression didn't waver. "Maybe. But at least I stand for something." The fight raged on, each man pushing the other to their limits. The bikers who had been watching began to falter, their confidence shaken by the intensity of the duel. Some started to retreat, their loyalty to Jace crumbling under the weight of his obsession. Mika and Tyler noticed the shift, their own movements growing more coordinated as they pushed back against the remaining bikers. The traps Bjorn had set began to take their toll, leaving the gang disoriented and scattered. Jace, however, was relentless. He fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose, his attacks growing more frenzied with each passing moment. But his recklessness was his downfall. Bjorn saw the opening, a momentary lapse in Jace's defense. He swung his axe with precision, the blade stopping just short of Jace's neck. "Yield," Bjorn said, his voice firm. "This fight is over." Jace froze, his chest heaving as he stared at the blade. His hand trembled, the knife slipping from his grip and falling to the ground. The rage in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or the realization that he had lost. Bjorn stepped back, lowering his axe but keeping it at the ready. "Walk away, Jace. This doesn't have to end like this." For a moment, Jace seemed to consider it. Then, with a snarl, he turned and staggered away, his movements unsteady. The remaining bikers hesitated before following him, their expressions a mix of confusion and relief. The clearing was quiet once more, the tension dissipating like the morning mist. Mika and Tyler approached Bjorn, their faces etched with exhaustion but also relief. "It's over," Mika said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. Bjorn shook his head. "Not yet, but it will be." Together, the three of them began to dismantle the traps and tend to their injuries, the weight of what they had accomplished settling over them. As the sun broke through the mist, casting the forest in golden light, Bjorn allowed himself a small smile. They had stood their ground, and they had won. For now, that was enough. The silence in the forest was deafening after the storm of battle. Bjorn, Mika, and Tyler stood amidst the remnants of what had been a relentless clash. The cabin, though battered, still stood strong, a testament to their resilience. The air was thick with the smell of earth and sweat, mingling with the faint metallic tang of blood. Mika leaned on her staff, her breaths coming in short gasps as she surveyed the clearing. The traps had done their job, and the bikers who hadn't fled were scattered, too injured or disoriented to pose a threat. Tyler knelt nearby, binding a shallow cut on his arm, his expression grim. Bjorn, bloodied but upright, rested his axe against the ground. His gaze swept the scene, his thoughts distant. "It's not over yet," he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Mika turned to him, her brows furrowed. "Jace is gone. The bikers are scattered. What else is there?" Bjorn's jaw tightened. A wound like this doesn't heal overnight. Jace might be gone for now, but he's not finished. The three of them began the arduous task of clearing the battlefield. Mika gathered the weapons left by the bikers, her movements deliberate despite the ache in her muscles. Tyler worked alongside her, collecting supplies and tending to injured bikers who had surrendered. Bjorn focused on repairing the cabin, his hands steady despite the toll the fight had taken on him. Each swing of his hammer reminded him of the cost of survival, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "You don't have to do this alone," Mika said, approaching him with a bundle of tools. "We're in this together." Bjorn paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I know, but some burdens are harder to share." That evening, the three of them gathered around a fire outside the cabin. The flickering flames cast long shadows across their faces, the warmth contrasting with the chill in the air. "We made it," Tyler said, his voice quiet, "but it doesn't feel like a victory." "It's not," Bjorn replied. "Not yet, but it's a step forward." Mika stared into the fire, her thoughts churning. What happens now? If Jace comes back, what do we do? We prepare, Bjorn said firmly. We rebuild, and we stay vigilant. Tyler hesitated before speaking. Do you think they'll ever stop? The bikers, Jace, all of it? Bjorn's expression grew somber. No, there will always be those who seek to take what isn't theirs, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Mika nodded, her resolve firming. Then we keep going, no matter what. The next few days were spent rebuilding and regrouping. The cabin, though scarred, began to take on renewed strength as they worked together. Mika's determination grew with each task, her confidence bolstered by the progress they made. She spent her evenings training, her movements fluid and precise as she practiced with her staff. Bjorn watched her from a distance, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You're becoming quite the fighter, he said one evening, joining her in the clearing. Mika lowered her staff, a hint of pride in her expression. I had a good teacher. Bjorn chuckled. You've done the hard part yourself. Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about standing tall, even when the odds are against you. Tyler scouted the nearby towns to gather information. Each time he returned, he brought back news of the bikers' movements, or lack thereof. They're fractured, he reported. A lot of them are disbanding, going back to their old lives. Jace burned too many bridges. Bjorn nodded. That's good news, but it doesn't mean we let our guard down. Mika glanced at Tyler, her curiosity piqued. What about Jace? Any sign of him? Tyler shook his head. Not yet, but he's out there, and he's not the kind to disappear quietly. As the weeks passed, the forest around the cabin began to come alive again. Birds returned, their songs filling the air, and the rustle of leaves in the breeze carried a sense of renewal. Mika found solace in these quiet moments, her connection to the land growing stronger. One afternoon, as she sat by the stream, Bjorn joined her. He carried a small bundle of papers, the corners worn and yellowed with age. What's that? Mika asked, curiosity flickering in her eyes. An old journal, Bjorn said, handing it to her. It belonged to my father. He used to write about the Viking way of life, their philosophy, their resilience. Mika opened the journal, her fingers brushing over the faded ink. The words were raw and powerful, a glimpse into a life filled with struggle and triumph. This is incredible, she said. Why didn't you show me this before? Bjorn smiled faintly. Because I wasn't ready. But now I think you are. The journal became a source of inspiration for Mika, a reminder of the strength that lay within her. She began to incorporate its teachings into her daily routine, her resolve growing stronger. As the fire crackled that evening, Mika spoke, her voice filled with determination. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something, a future. Bjorn nodded, his gaze steady. And it starts here, with us. Tyler raised his mug in a silent toast. To the future, he said. To the future, Mika echoed, her heart swelling with hope. The three of them sat together under the stars, the weight of the past lifting as they looked ahead. The aftermath of the battle had left its scars, but it had also forged a bond between them, one that would carry them through whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting golden beams on the clearing around the cabin. The forest, once shrouded in tension and violence, now seemed to breathe easier. Bjorn stood on the porch, his eyes sweeping over the landscape as he drank in the serenity of the moment. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the air felt lighter. Inside the cabin, Mika was busy organizing the tools they'd gathered during their rebuilding efforts. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, her mind focused on the task at hand. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their new life, repairing, fortifying, and preparing for the unknown. Tyler walked in, carrying a bundle of firewood. "That should last us a couple of days," he said, setting it down near the fireplace. His voice carried a calmness that mirrored the environment. Mika looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thanks, Tyler. It's nice to have things running smoothly for a change." "It won't stay that way forever," Bjorn said as he stepped into the cabin, his expression thoughtful. "We've bought ourselves time, but there's always more work to be done." The day was spent on repairs. The cabin's walls were reinforced with new wood, and the makeshift barricades around the perimeter were replaced with sturdier constructions. Mika worked alongside Bjorn, her strength and determination evident in every swing of the hammer. "You're a natural," Bjorn said, watching as Mika secured a beam into place. "I'm learning from the best," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "Besides, it feels good to be building something instead of fighting for once." Bjorn nodded, his gaze distant. "There's a certain peace in creation. The Vikings didn't just raid, they built, farmed, and forged communities." Mika paused, considering his words. "Do you think we can build something like that here? A real community?" Bjorn's eyes met hers. "It's not about the place. It's about the people. If we stay true to what we've learned, we can create something worth protecting." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing, Tyler returned from a scouting mission. His expression was relaxed, a sign that the nearby towns remained quiet. "No signs of Jace or his men," Tyler reported as he joined Bjorn and Mika by the fire. "If he's out there, he's keeping a low profile." "Good," Bjorn said. "That gives us more time to prepare." Mika leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What about the towns? Have you talked to anyone?" Tyler hesitated. "People are still on edge, but they're rebuilding too. The bikers caused damage, but most of them are moving on." Bjorn nodded. "That's a start. The more people stand up for themselves, the harder it will be for anyone like Jace to gain power again." In the following days, Bjorn decided to venture into one of the nearby towns himself. Mika insisted on coming along, and Tyler stayed behind to guard the cabin. The journey was uneventful, the forest quiet as they made their way to the small settlement. When they arrived, the town was bustling with activity. People were repairing storefronts, clearing debris, and replanting gardens. The sight was both heartening and sobering, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Bjorn and Mika approached a group of townspeople who were working on a damaged roof. One of the men, a tall, wiry individual with a sun-weathered face, paused to greet them. "Morning," Bjorn said, his tone calm but firm. "We're not here to cause trouble, just wanted to see how things were going." The man eyed them warily for a moment before nodding. "Things are better now that the bikers are gone. Are you the ones who drove them off?" "Something like that," Bjorn replied. "We're trying to make sure they don't come back." The man extended his hand. "Name's Carter. We appreciate what you've done. If there's anything we can do to help, just say the word." As Bjorn and Mika continued through the town, they noticed more signs of recovery. Children played in the streets, their laughter ringing out like a balm against the scars of the past. Mika couldn't help but smile at the sight. "It's amazing," she said softly. "After everything they've been through, they're still able to find joy." Bjorn nodded. "That's the strength of people. It's why we fight, to protect moments like this." Mika's smile faded slightly. "Do you think Jace could destroy all this if he came back?" Bjorn's expression darkened. "Not if we're ready, and not if they're ready." Back at the cabin, Tyler had been working on expanding their defenses. By the time Bjorn and Mika returned, the perimeter was lined with additional barricades, and a system of warning traps had been put in place. "Nice work," Bjorn said, inspecting the improvements. "You've been busy." Tyler shrugged. "Figured it's better to be over-prepared than caught off guard." Mika nodded in agreement. "We've seen what can happen when people aren't ready. This time, we'll be ready for anything." That evening, the three of them sat around the fire, their conversation turning to the future. Mika shared her vision of what they could build, a place where people could come together, share knowledge, and protect one another. Bjorn listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "It's a good vision," he said finally, "but it'll take more than just the three of us." "Then we find others," Mika said. "People like Carter and his town. People who are willing to fight for something bigger than themselves." Tyler raised his mug, a small smile on his face. "To rebuilding," he said. "To rebuilding," Mika and Bjorn echoed. The fire crackled softly as they sat together, the weight of the past beginning to lift. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, they felt ready to face it. The early morning mist clung to the ground as Bjorn stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The small town below was quiet, its streets lined with neat houses and vibrant gardens. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had faced in the weeks prior. Bjorn inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling his lungs as he considered the path ahead. Inside the cabin, Mika was packing supplies for their next journey. She had become a natural at organizing and planning, her confidence evident in every decision she made. Tyler was outside, tending to the traps and barricades, his focus unwavering as he prepared to guard the homestead in their absence. "You sure about this?" Tyler asked as Bjorn joined him by the fire pit. Bjorn nodded. "It's time. We've done what we can here, but there's more to be done out there." Tyler hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "And Mika? She's ready for this?" "She's stronger than she knows," Bjorn replied. "This journey will help her realize that." By mid-morning, Mika and Bjorn were on the road, their packs loaded with provisions and tools. The journey was quiet, the forest surrounding them alive with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. Mika walked alongside Bjorn, her staff resting on her shoulder. "Where are we going first?" she asked, breaking the silence. "There's a historical society in the next town," Bjorn replied. "They reached out after hearing about what happened with Jace's gang. They want to help rebuild and preserve the area." Mika's brow furrowed. "A historical society? How do they fit into all this?" Bjorn smiled faintly. "They're more than just scholars. They're people who care about history, about preserving stories and lessons from the past. If we can align with them, we can build something meaningful." The town they arrived in was bustling with activity. The streets were lined with vendors selling fresh produce and handcrafted goods, and the air was filled with the hum of conversations. It was a place that seemed untouched by the troubles Bjorn and Mika had faced, yet it held a quiet resilience. At the local library, they were greeted by a woman named Eleanor. She was in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a warm smile that belied her no-nonsense demeanor. "You must be Bjorn and Mika," Eleanor said, shaking their hands. "We've heard a lot about you. Your efforts against Jace's gang have inspired people." Bjorn inclined his head. "We're just trying to do what's right. Eleanor, this is Mika." Eleanor studied Mika for a moment before nodding approvingly. "You've chosen your allies well, Bjorn. Now let's talk about how we can help each other." The meeting with Eleanor and her team lasted hours. They discussed plans for rebuilding communities, creating safe havens, and preserving the lessons learned from their struggles. Mika listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. "What about education?" Mika asked at one point. "Can we teach people about conflict resolution? About how to protect themselves without resorting to violence?" Eleanor's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of initiative we need. If we empower people with knowledge, we can prevent groups like Jace's gang from gaining power again." Bjorn watched Mika with quiet pride. She was stepping into her own, her voice steady and confident as she shared her ideas. It was a transformation he had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect so soon. As the sun began to set, Eleanor led Bjorn and Mika to a nearby community center. Inside, the walls were adorned with artifacts and photographs chronicling the town's history. It was a space filled with stories, a testament to the community's resilience. "This is where it begins," Eleanor said, gesturing to the room. "If we can use this place as a hub, we can reach more people, spread the word, and build a network." Bjorn nodded. "It's a good start, but it'll take time to get people on board." "That's where you come in," Eleanor replied. "You've already proven that you can inspire change. People will listen to you." Mika looked at Bjorn, her expression serious. "She's right. We've seen what happens when people feel powerless. If we can give them hope, show them that they can fight back, we can make a real difference." Bjorn's gaze softened. "Then let's make it happen." That night, Bjorn and Mika stayed at the community center, their sleeping bags laid out beneath a mural depicting the town's founding. Mika lay awake, her thoughts racing as she considered the day's events. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking the silence. Bjorn turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It's never easy to know for sure, but if we're helping people, giving them the tools to stand up for themselves, then I believe it's worth it." Mika nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Then I'm all in, whatever it takes." Bjorn smiled faintly. "Good, because this is just the beginning." The next morning, they met with more members of the community, sharing their plans and gathering input. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many people volunteering their time and resources to help. By the time they left the town, Bjorn and Mika felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had planted the seeds of something greater, a network of people united by a shared vision of resilience and strength. As they walked back into the forest, the sun breaking through the canopy above, Mika turned to Bjorn. "Do you think we can really make a difference?" Bjorn's expression was steady, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I know we can. One step at a time." The forest seemed to embrace them as they continued on their journey, the promise of a new path guiding their way. The forest was alive with the hum of summer as Mika wandered through the clearing, her staff in hand. The early morning light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the ground. It had been weeks since their visit to the Historical Society, and the momentum they had sparked was beginning to take shape. Bjorn had encouraged her to step forward, to take ownership of the vision they had crafted together. "This is your time," he had said one evening by the fire. "You've shown strength and courage. Now it's time to lead." Those words echoed in Mika's mind as she prepared to visit a neighboring town alone. It was a daunting prospect, but she knew it was necessary. Bjorn and Tyler would remain at the cabin, continuing to strengthen their defenses and build relationships with nearby communities. The journey to the neighboring town was uneventful, the path well worn by travelers and merchants. Mika's mind raced as she considered the task ahead. She would meet with a group of educators who had expressed interest in her ideas about teaching conflict resolution and resilience. The town came into view as the sun reached its zenith, its streets bustling with activity. Mika paused at the edge of the square, taking in the sights and sounds. The atmosphere was lively, yet there was an undercurrent of caution, a reminder of the scars left by Jace's gang. She made her way to the community hall, a modest building with wide windows and a welcoming porch. Inside, she was greeted by a woman named Clara, who introduced herself as the head of the local school. "You must be Mika," Clara said warmly, extending a hand. "It's an honor to meet you. We've heard so much about your work." Mika shook her hand, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. "Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share what we've been working on." The meeting lasted for hours. Mika outlined her vision for a program that would teach practical skills alongside emotional resilience. She spoke about the importance of community, of standing together in the face of adversity. "What we've learned," Mika said, her voice steady, "is that strength isn't just about physical power. It's about knowing your worth, standing up for what's right, and supporting those around you." The room was silent for a moment before Clara spoke. This is exactly what we need. The children here have seen too much violence, too much fear. If we can give them hope, teach them to believe in themselves, we can change their future." The educators agreed to collaborate, and plans were made to host workshops and training sessions. Mika felt a surge of confidence as she realized that her ideas were taking root. That evening, Mika stayed in the town, lodging in a small inn near the square. She sat by the window in her room, watching as the townspeople went about their evening routines. A sense of purpose filled her, but there was also a flicker of doubt. She pulled out the journal Bjorn had given her, flipping through its pages until she found a passage that resonated. "True strength lies not in the blade, but in the heart that wields it. A warrior fights not for glory, but for those who cannot fight for themselves." Mika closed the journal, her resolve renewed. She would return to the cabin with good news, but she also knew there was still much to do. When she arrived back at the cabin a few days later, Tyler greeted her with a grin. "How'd it go?" he asked, leaning against the porch railing. "It went well," Mika replied, setting down her pack. "They're on board. We're starting the workshops next month." Bjorn stepped out of the cabin, his expression one of quiet pride. "I knew you could do it." Mika smiled. "It's a start, but we'll need more help if we're going to reach more towns." "We'll find it," Bjorn said, "one step at a time." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mika threw herself into her work, coordinating with Clara and other educators to develop the curriculum. Bjorn and Tyler supported her efforts, providing resources and logistical help. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Mika shared her thoughts. "I never imagined myself doing something like this," she admitted. "It's overwhelming sometimes." Bjorn nodded. "Leadership often is. But you're not alone. You've got us, and you've got the people who believe in your vision." Tyler grinned. "Besides, you're a natural. I've seen you in action. You've got this." Mika laughed, the sound light and genuine. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than herself. As the first workshop approached, Mika traveled back to the neighboring town, this time accompanied by Bjorn. They arrived to find the community center bustling with activity, the air buzzing with anticipation. The workshop was a resounding success. Mika led sessions on communication, teamwork, and self-defense, while Bjorn shared stories from his father's journal, weaving lessons of resilience and honor into his tales. By the end of the day, the participants were energized, their faces alight with hope. Mika felt a swell of pride as she looked out at the crowd, knowing that they had taken the first step toward something transformative. That night, as Mika and Bjorn walked back to their inn, she turned to him. "Do you think this will make a difference?" Bjorn's gaze was steady. "It already has, and it will continue to, as long as we keep going." Mika nodded, her resolve firm. "Then we won't stop. Not until everyone who needs help has it." Bjorn smiled. "That's the spirit. Together, we'll build something that lasts." The stars shone brightly overhead as they walked, their path illuminated not just by the light above, but by the promise of what lay ahead. The quiet hum of the forest was broken by the low rumble of motorcycles in the distance. Bjorn paused mid-swing, his axe suspended over the chopping block, his senses on high alert. Mika emerged from the cabin, her eyes narrowing as she listened. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Bjorn nodded, setting the axe down carefully. "Stay close. Tyler, get the traps ready." Tyler appeared from behind the cabin, his face grim. "Sounds like company." The three of them moved quickly, their practiced efficiency a testament to the weeks they'd spent preparing for this moment. The bikers were back, and while their numbers seemed smaller, the threat was no less real. It wasn't long before the bikers emerged from the tree line, their bikes kicking up dust as they came to a halt near the clearing. Bjorn stepped forward, his posture calm but commanding. Mika and Tyler flanked him, their weapons at the ready. At the head of the group was a familiar face, Tyler. The young biker who had once stood against Jace now wore an expression of determination mixed with uncertainty. Bjorn's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here, Tyler? I thought you were done with this life." Tyler dismounted, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to fight. None of us are. We came to talk." Bjorn's gaze swept over the group. There were fewer than a dozen bikers, all of them looking weary and worn. They bore no weapons, and their stance was more defensive than aggressive. "Talk about what?" Bjorn asked, his tone guarded. Tyler hesitated before answering. "We want out. We want to change, but we don't know how." The tension in the air was palpable as Bjorn considered Tyler's words. Mika glanced at him, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Finally, Bjorn spoke. "You've caused a lot of pain. Why should we trust you now?" Tyler's shoulders sagged slightly. "You're right. We've made mistakes, big ones. But Jace is gone, and most of us have realized we don't want to keep living like this. We don't want to be feared anymore." One of the other bikers stepped forward, a woman with sharp features and a quiet strength. "We've seen what you're building here. We want to be part of it, if you'll let us." Mika stepped closer to Bjorn, her voice low. "Do you think they're telling the truth?" Bjorn didn't answer immediately. He studied the bikers, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and desperation. Finally, he nodded. "We'll hear them out." The bikers dismounted, and Bjorn led them to the clearing near the cabin. They sat in a loose circle, the atmosphere tense but without hostility. Tyler began to speak, explaining how the group had splintered after Jace's defeat. Those who had stayed with him had become disillusioned, tired of the violence and constant running. "We're not good at this," Tyler admitted. "Living like normal people, I mean. But we want to try. We want to learn how to do things the right way." Bjorn listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Tyler finished, Bjorn spoke. "If you're serious about this, there's a lot you'll need to unlearn, and a lot more you'll need to prove." The woman who had spoken earlier nodded. "We're ready for that. We know it won't be easy, but we're willing to put in the work." Over the next few days, the bikers began to integrate into the community. Bjorn and Mika set them to work repairing the cabin, expanding the defenses, and helping with the workshops Mika had been organizing. It was hard, grueling work, but the bikers didn't complain. Mika watched as they struggled with tasks that seemed second nature to her now. She saw their frustration, their awkwardness, but also their determination. It was a reminder of how far she herself had come since this journey began. One evening, she approached the woman who had spoken up during their first meeting. "You never told us your name," Mika said. The woman smiled faintly. "It's Iris, and I didn't think it mattered, not after everything we've done." "It matters," Mika said firmly. "Who you were doesn't define who you are now. You're here, trying to do better. That's what counts." Iris nodded, her expression softening. "Thanks, that means a lot." As the days turned into weeks, a fragile sense of trust began to form between the bikers and the rest of the community. Bjorn noticed the change in their demeanor, the way they carried themselves, the way they spoke to others. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, as Bjorn and Tyler worked side by side repairing a fence, the younger man spoke. "I didn't think you'd give us a chance. Not after everything we did." Bjorn paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Everyone deserves a second chance if they're willing to work for it. But that doesn't mean trust comes easy." "I get that," Tyler said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to prove we mean it." Bjorn nodded. "Good, because this isn't just about you. It's about what we're building here." By the time the first snowfall blanketed the forest, the bikers had become a part of the community. They still had a long way to go, but their presence no longer felt like an intrusion. Mika, in particular, had grown close to Iris, finding in her a kindred spirit, a reminder that even the most broken paths could lead to redemption. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Mika turned to Bjorn. "Do you think this will last?" Bjorn's gaze was steady. "It'll last as long as we're willing to fight for it." Tyler raised his mug, a small smile on his face. "To second chances," he said. "To second chances," the others echoed, their voices filled with quiet determination. The fire crackled softly as they sat together, the weight of the past slowly lifting. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, they faced it together, not as enemies, but as allies. The town square bustled with activity as preparations for the festival reached their peak. Bright banners fluttered in the breeze, their vivid colors a sharp contrast to the rugged backdrop of the forest. Tables were set with handcrafted decorations, and the air was filled with the scent of baked goods and roasting meats. Mika stood at the center of it all, overseeing the arrangements with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The idea of hosting a festival that combined Viking traditions with modern values had been hers, and she was determined to make it a success. Bjorn approached her, a wooden carving in his hands. "The main table's ready," he said, setting the piece down. It was a small ship, its sails painted with intricate patterns. Mika smiled. "It's perfect, thank you." Bjorn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "This is more than just a celebration. It's a reminder of what we've built together." As the sun began to set, people from neighboring towns and communities arrived, their faces alight with curiosity and anticipation. The festival was the first event of its kind, a gathering meant to honor the past while embracing the future. Mika and Bjorn greeted the guests, introducing them to the bikers who had become an integral part of the preparations. Iris stood near the entrance, her posture tentative, but her eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Think they'll accept us?" Iris asked as Mika joined her. "They already have," Mika replied. "You're not the same people you were, and tonight is about showing that." The evening unfolded with a series of events designed to highlight the community's shared values. There were storytelling sessions led by Bjorn, who captivated the audience with tales of Viking resilience and honor. Mika organized team challenges that encouraged cooperation and trust, while the bikers demonstrated practical skills like crafting and repairing tools. At the center of it all was a bonfire, its flames reaching toward the sky. Around it, people shared stories, laughter, and food, their voices mingling in a harmonious symphony. Mika watched from the edge of the crowd, her heart swelling with pride. This was what they had worked for, a community brought together by a shared vision of strength, unity, and hope. As the night deepened, Bjorn stepped forward, his silhouette framed by the firelight. He held up a ceremonial axe, its blade gleaming in the flickering glow. "This axe belonged to my father," he began, his voice steady. "It's a symbol of resilience, of the strength to endure and rebuild. Tonight, I want to pass it on, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of what we've achieved together." He turned to Mika, holding the axe out to her. "You've shown courage and determination. You've inspired us all. This belongs to you now." Mika's breath caught as she accepted the axe, its weight solid in her hands. She looked at Bjorn, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you. I'll do my best to honor this." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the night. Mika felt a surge of gratitude and determination as she looked out at the faces of the people who had become her family. Later, as the festival wound down, Mika and Bjorn sat by the dying embers of the fire. The air was cool, the stars twinkling overhead. "You've come a long way," Bjorn said, his tone reflective. "I always knew you had it in you, but seeing it happen, it's something else." Mika smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of this." Bjorn shook his head. "You had the strength all along. You just needed a chance to prove it, to yourself." In the days that followed, the festival's success became the talk of the region. Word spread of the community's efforts to blend tradition with modern values, inspiring others to take similar steps. The bikers, once viewed with suspicion, were now seen as integral members of the community. Iris, in particular, had become a leader among them, her quiet strength earning the respect of those around her. Mika threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, coordinating with nearby towns to expand their initiatives. Bjorn, meanwhile, began to consider his next steps. The festival had been a turning point, and he felt a growing sense that his time in the forest might be drawing to a close. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of the cabin, Bjorn broached the subject. "I've been thinking about what's next," he said, his tone measured. Mika glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I think it's time for me to move on," Bjorn replied. "You've built something incredible here. You don't need me anymore." Mika's eyes widened. "But you're a part of this. We wouldn't have gotten this far without you." Bjorn smiled gently. "And now it's your turn to take it further. I'll always be here if you need me, but this is your legacy now." That evening, Mika sat by the fire alone, the ceremonial axe resting across her lap. She thought about everything they had accomplished, the lives they had changed, and the bonds they had forged. She knew Bjorn was right. The community had grown beyond what any of them had imagined, and it was time for her to take the lead. But the thought of him leaving filled her with a bittersweet ache. As the stars winked above, Mika made a silent promise. To honor the legacy Bjorn had entrusted to her, to continue building a future rooted in strength, unity, and hope. The forest around her seemed to hum with quiet approval, the fire's glow casting long shadows that danced in time with her thoughts. The Viking legacy was no longer just a story. It was alive, woven into the fabric of their lives. The first signs of winter had begun to settle over the town, a crisp chill in the air hinting at the change of seasons. Mika stood at the edge of the square, watching as people bustled about their daily routines. The festival had been a turning point, but its true impact was only beginning to unfold. The once divided groups, villagers, former bikers, and travelers, were now working side by side. The walls of suspicion had crumbled, replaced by mutual respect and cooperation. Iris and the others had fully integrated into the town, their presence no longer seen as a threat, but as a symbol of change. Bjorn watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. "You did this," he said to Mika. She shook her head. "We all did. You, me, Tyler, Iris, everyone who chose to believe in something better." Bjorn smiled faintly. "Still, it was your vision that brought them together." At the community center, Mika met with Eleanor and Clara to discuss the educational programs. The workshops had been a resounding success, drawing participants eager to learn self-defense, conflict resolution, and survival skills. "We've had more interest than expected," Eleanor said, flipping through a ledger. "People are seeing the value in what we're teaching." Clara nodded. "More importantly, they're applying it. We've heard stories of people standing up for themselves peacefully." Mika felt a swell of pride but kept her tone measured. "That's exactly what we hoped for, but we can't get complacent." Eleanor chuckled. "Spoken like a true leader." Mika glanced at Bjorn, who simply nodded. She wasn't sure when she had become one, but she no longer doubted it. Later that afternoon, Mika walked through the village with Tyler, discussing security improvements. Though the bikers who had stayed behind had fully committed to their new path, there was always the risk of outside threats. "We've got a watch system now," Tyler said, "rotating patrols so no one gets caught off guard." Mika nodded. "Good. We might not be at war anymore, but we can't let our guard down." Tyler smirked. "Spoken like Bjorn." She laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." As they passed the town square, Iris waved them over. "You two need to see something." She led them to the outskirts of the town where children had gathered in a clearing. practicing with wooden staffs, mimicking Mika's training. One of the younger boys turned and grinned. "We're going to be strong like you." Mika felt a lump in her throat. She crouched to meet the boy's gaze. "You already are. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right." Iris crossed her arms. "Looks like you've inspired more than just the adults." Mika exhaled slowly. "I guess so." That evening, as the first snowflakes drifted from the sky, the town gathered around the bonfire in the square. It had become a new tradition, a symbol of their unity. Bjorn stood beside Mika, his expression contemplative. "This place is different now," he said. Mika nodded. "Because we fought for it. Because we believed in it." Bjorn turned to her. "And now it's time for me to go." Mika's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "I do," he said gently. "This was never meant to be my home. It was always meant to be yours." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Where will you go?" Bjorn smiled. "Wherever the wind takes me." The next morning, the town gathered at the forest's edge to see Bjorn off. He had packed lightly, taking only what he needed. Mika stood beside him, the ceremonial axe strapped to her back. "This isn't goodbye," she said firmly. Bjorn chuckled. "No, it's not. You'll always have a way to find me." Tyler clapped him on the back. "Try not to get into too much trouble." Bjorn smirked. "No promises." Iris, who had stood silently, took a step forward. "Thank you," she said, "for giving us a chance." Bjorn nodded. "You earned it." As he stepped onto the path leading away from the town, he turned one last time to look at Mika. "Lead well." She swallowed hard, but managed a smile. "I will." Then, with a final nod, Bjorn disappeared into the trees. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the mountains, casting golden shadows over the town. Mika stood at the top of the hill, overlooking the village she had helped shape. The fires had burned, the battles had raged, and through it all, they had built something that endured. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about thriving. She exhaled slowly, gripping the ceremonial axe strapped to her back. This was her home now, but her journey was far from over. The town square was alive with movement as people prepared for the next step in their journey. The school had grown, with new students arriving from nearby settlements to learn about self-defense, leadership, and survival. The former bikers had integrated into the town, taking up trades and responsibilities that kept the community running. Iris stood at the center of it all, organizing the training sessions. Mika watched her, pride swelling in her chest. She had come a long way, stepping into a role Mika never could have predicted. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" Iris asked without turning. Mika hesitated. "Not yet, but one day." Iris smirked. "You're more like Bjorn than you think." Mika chuckled. "That's what I'm afraid of." Iris turned, her gaze serious. "The town will be fine. Whether you stay or go, you've already changed this place." Mika nodded. "I just want to make sure it lasts." That evening, a gathering was held at the bonfire. The community had grown beyond what any of them had expected, and tonight was a moment of reflection. Mika stood before them, looking at the faces that had become her family. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she admitted. "I never saw myself as a leader. But strength isn't about being the loudest voice or the fastest fighter. It's about standing up when it's easier to walk away. It's about choosing the right path, even when it's the hardest." She let her words sink in, watching as heads nodded, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "Bjorn taught me that, and now it's up to us to teach the next generation." Tyler raised his mug. "To the next generation." "To the future," Iris added. The voices of the town rose in unison, a chorus of unity and hope. Mika felt something shift inside her, a sense of certainty she had never felt before. She had spent so much time doubting herself, but standing here, surrounded by the people she had helped lead, she finally believed in herself. The next morning, Mika gathered a group of students, leading them to the training grounds. The morning air was crisp, the first traces of frost covering the grass. She stood before them, gripping a wooden staff. "What is strength?" she asked. One of the younger students raised his hand. "Being strong enough to fight?" Mika shook her head. "No. Strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Another student spoke up. "Like how you and Bjorn didn't try to destroy Jace's gang, but helped the ones who wanted to change?" Mika smiled. "Exactly. Strength isn't about breaking things. It's about knowing when to build." The lesson continued, the students practicing discipline, control, and teamwork. By the end, they were exhausted but determined. One of the younger girls looked up at Mika. "Will you ever leave?" Mika hesitated before answering. "Someday, maybe. But not yet. There's still more to do." The girl nodded. "Good. We still need you." Weeks passed, and the community continued to grow. Mika found herself reflecting on everything that had led them here. The gas station fight seemed like a lifetime ago, a different world. She had been a different person then. One afternoon, she walked to the edge of the forest, following a path she had walked many times before. She found herself at the old cabin, the place where Bjorn had first taken refuge. It was quiet now, the clearing covered in a thin layer of snow. She stepped inside, running her fingers over the worn wooden walls. It felt different now, not like a hideout, but like a relic of a past life. She found an old carving Bjorn had left behind, a simple wolf's head, its details rough but intentional. A note was scrawled beneath it in Bjorn's familiar handwriting. "The pack survives together." Mika smiled. "You always knew, didn't you?" she murmured. She sat there for a long time, letting the silence wrap around her. The past, the present, the future. It all felt so intertwined, so fragile and yet so strong. That night, Mika returned to the town, standing on the hill overlooking the lights below. This was her home now, her responsibility. She had once been uncertain of her path, but now she knew. She was exactly where she was meant to be. A gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the branches. Mika closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. She could almost hear Bjorn's voice in the wind, reminding her that strength wasn't in the battles fought, but in the lives protected. As she stood there, the ceremonial axe at her side, she thought about the future. There was still much to do, still people who needed help, still stories left to be written. She took a deep breath and turned back toward the town. The firelight flickered in the distance, a beacon of what they had built together. The Viking legacy lived on. Mika felt a renewed sense of determination settle over her. She would continue the work they had started, teaching, leading, and protecting. This town, these people were her family now, and she would see to it that they remained safe and strong. Tomorrow she would begin a new chapter, but tonight she let herself enjoy the peace they had fought so hard to earn. As she walked back down the hill, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots, she whispered a quiet farewell to the man who had changed her life. She knew their paths would cross again. For now, she carried his lessons forward. And that was enough.